Chapter 2771, Alien-like players at Feng's question. An exceptional silence filled the room. Lifeless Thorn and the others simultaneously focused their gaze on Yu Luo. Ever since they arrived in this place, they had come across too many unknown and surprising matters. However, the only thing they could do was remain silent and quietly observe everything, including the so-called NPCs and players here. In their opinion, be it the NPCs, monsters, or players here, they all felt alien. This was especially true for the players here. Despite being players, the players here gave them a completely different feeling than the members of their party. It felt as if the players here were not players at all, but rather the original inhabitants of this world. It was as if these players had already accepted this virtual world as their own. No. To be precise, these players treated the world of God's domain as a real world. Moreover, judging by these players' behavior, they had resided in this world for a considerably long period. Otherwise, the alien feeling they gave off wouldn't be so conspicuous. This alien feeling was especially familiar to Feng. Looking at the players in this ancient era felt like looking at Phoenix Rain back when he met her in Flame Dragon City. It was just that Phoenix Rain seemed more alien back then than these people. She felt as if she was a player yet not a player at the same time. In short, she gave off a very strange feeling. Now, the players here gave him a similar feeling. Hence, the shock he felt when he met these players initially was much greater compared to that of Lifeless Thorn and the others. However, he couldn't openly state his feelings. After all, the matter concerning Phoenix Rain was of great importance. Moreover, at the same time as their party was finding the players here alien, these players had similarly noticed the strangeness of their party. It was evident that these players were foreign to players like their party as well. In addition, through the previous conversation he had with Cooling Cloud, Feng got the impression that they lived in completely different worlds. The old man in the cave had already stated that this world was the ancient era of God's domain. Logically, there shouldn't be any other players in this world. Yet, not only were there players living in this world, but there were even a large number of them. Based on his initial estimates, there should be well over 5 million players residing in Meteorite City. This was already on the level of royal capitals in the modern era. Meanwhile, according to Cooling Cloud, there were at least 500 such main cities on the continent. If Meteorite City was representative of these main cities, there should be well over 2.5 billion players in the ancient era. Yet, none of the various powers in the real world had an inkling that there were players playing in the ancient era of God's domain. That's right. Everything is as you guys have guessed. When Yu Luo saw the look everyone was giving her, her originally light and happy expression instantly vanished, replaced by a solemn expression. Whether it is this God's domain or the players here, both come from a different world from ours. A different world? Solitary Nine's breathing grew heavy at Yu Luo's words. How is this possible? Although he had already had suspicions, he still found it unbelievable after hearing Yu Luo's confirmation. While it was indeed true that God's domain was a virtual reality game like no other, it was still far-fetched to say that people of a different world were playing the game with them. No, it would be somewhat incorrect to say that they're from a different world. Shaking her head, Yu Luo smiled and added, to be precise, they are people living in a different world. What do you mean? Feng asked curiously. You should know of the migration plan that took place 100 years ago, right? Of course, we know. Back then, due to a shortage of resources and the worsening environmental pollution, Earth had gradually become unsuitable for human life. Hence, a migration plan was executed. I heard that many people at that time were sent out to explore the universe for habitable planets, Solitary Nine answered, nodding. Could it be? Are you saying these players are the people who were sent out? Yes. They are the descendants of those explorers, Yu Luo said. Back then, Earth had already discovered several habitable planets. However, they were too distant from Earth, and the journey would take a long time. Hence, after gathering all of the world's power, several hundred interstellar spaceships with self-sustaining environments were constructed. These spaceships then set forth toward the selected habitable planets while carrying all sorts of resources and hundreds of millions of Earth's outstanding personnel. These people have been living on the interstellar spaceships for these past 100 years. However, these people experienced a much longer time than people on Earth during their journey. I heard that they've been living in space for over 600 years. Some spaceships have even experienced over 900 years of life. The population on these spaceships has also continued to grow over time, with the total population having exceeded 10 billion long ago. The original spaceships have also acquired resources from various planets on the way and modified and upgraded themselves. At this point, these spaceships can no longer be considered mere spaceships but more like interstellar continents. And they are still making their way to the habitable planets. However, as these interstellar continents had limited resources, the majority of their population can only reside in virtual worlds. Only a small minority has the privilege to roam the outside world. Hence, these people are accustomed to virtual worlds. The professional players of our worlds can't even compare to these people in this regard, as virtual worlds have long since become a part of these people's lives. After God's Domain's launch, the game became their everything. The understanding they have of God's domain far exceeds ours. When Yuluo finished speaking, silence enveloped the room for a long time. Solitary 9 and the others even had their mouths hanging wide open. They never thought that they would actually be ignorant of such a huge matter happening outside Earth. They also couldn't even begin to imagine how it felt to live out in the open universe for several centuries. I see. After hearing Yuluo's explanation, Feng came to another realization. During his previous life, right before he reincarnated, God's Domain had suddenly launched an expansion pack for seemingly no rhyme or reason. It was the most special expansion pack ever added to the game. Normally, the main God system would first implement a new expansion pack in the game before notifying players about it. However, news of this expansion pack had spread in the real world before its implementation. In fact, even its name had been revealed beforehand. War of Worlds. The description that came with this announcement also clearly stated that there would be several worlds attacking the main continent of God's Domain. For the sake of their own survival, these worlds would wage war with each other on an unprecedented scale. The winner would live, and the loser would die. This announcement had agitated countless people in God's Domain when it came out. After all, the territories on the main continent were basically fixed at that point, and few disputes occurred between the various powers. The game had been trending toward stability. With the sudden appearance of several new worlds, how could the players of God's Domain not feel excited? The various major powers, in particular, had immediately begun sharpening their blades after the announcement. So long as the new expansion pack took place, they would immediately invade these new worlds and start a new journey. However, as a consequence of the expansion pack, Feng found himself fired. Upon seeing the stunned expressions of the people around her, Yuluo revealed a bitter smile and said, "My arrival here was a complete accident. While exploring an underground space in Dragonheart City by myself, I got caught in a space-time storm. By the time I woke up, I was already in this place. Currently, I have spent 20 days here already. Although I want to go back, I haven't been able to return even after dying or jumping into other space-time storms. What's most frustrating is that I can't log out of the game from here." "You can't log out?" At Yuluo's words, Solitary 9 and the others hurriedly checked whether they could log out or not. If they couldn't, then it would be a huge problem. Nowadays, all virtual gaming cabins had a nutrient solution storage that could let players stay online for 1 or 2 months without any problem. The latest model could even let players stay online for 3 months. And in the event that players depleted their supply of nutrient solution and couldn't leave their gaming cabin for some reason, the cabin would issue a system alert, and professionals would come quickly to deal with the problem. Hence, players had no need to worry about starving to death. Even so, this wasn't good news. "No way. I really can't log out." Solitary 9 couldn't help growing anxious. It would be very inconvenient for them if they couldn't go offline. After all, there were many things they needed to do in the real world. Moreover, staying online long-term would affect their physical bodies to a certain degree. They can't log out? Looking at the log out button on his system interface, Feng found that it was still brightly lit, indicating that he could go offline whenever he wanted. Is it because of that world stone in my bag? After some thought, the only explanation Feng could come up with for this situation was the world stone. After all, this item could stabilize the principle of all things, which meant that he should be able to bypass the rules of this world. With this, it seems I don't need to be too anxious. While the ancient god's domain was indeed excellent, he also had many things he needed to do in the real world. He couldn't stay online long-term. With the world stone, he could now feel relieved. Feng then conversed with Yu Luo about the basic information of this world, particularly about information relating to legacies. After the conversation, Lifeless Thorn and the others sighed ruefully. The ancient god's domain was indeed different. Compared to the modern god's domain, the players living in the ancient god's domain had a much easier time getting promoted. With a reliable team, players had no problem at all securing a complete Tier 3 legacy. In fact, with enough rare materials, one could even seek out a Tier 3 instructor to exchange for a complete legacy. The only limitation of this method was that players could only exchange up to 3 legacies. As for the promotion to Tier 4, while it was significantly more difficult than that to Tier 3, it was still much easier compared to the process in the modern god's domain. At the very least, players didn't have to seek out a legacy land in the middle of nowhere. They could simply head to a Tier 4 instructor and choose to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quest. They would then be teleported to a Tier 4 legacy space. However, the cost of this method was high. Each challenge required the payment of 15,000 magic crystals. The difficulty of the promotion quest was the same as in modern times. Players still had to learn a Tier 4 legacy skill or spell during the allotted time. Failure meant having to wait 20 natural days before they could re-challenge it. At this time, only 3 players in Meteorite City had successfully reached Tier 4. At this point, Feng wished he could bring all of Zero Wing's Tier 4 Flowing Water Realm experts and above to this place. Even if it meant spending a lot of magic crystals, it would still be much better than searching for a legacy land. After all, searching for a legacy land was not only time-consuming, but success was also highly dependent on luck. If word of this matter got out in the modern god's domain, every power across the continent would most likely do everything they could to secure this opportunity. Commander, can I borrow 10,000 magic crystals from you? Lifeless Thorn asked as he looked at Feng. I'll pay you back double as soon as we return. Commander, you can't play favorites. Solitary 9 objected hurriedly, knowing that Feng did not bring a lot of magic crystals with him to the ancient god's domain. Every bit given away counted. Meanwhile, Yen Yen Cleansing Whistle also stared at Feng with eloquent eyes. Relax. Feng smiled spontaneously when he saw everyone's reactions. Although I didn't bring a lot of magic crystals with me, I still have a way to let each of you challenge your promotion quests once. You can challenge yours as well, Yu Luo. Me? Yu Luo was stunned by Feng's words. But I don't have that many magic crystals. She, too, yearned to challenge her Tier 4 promotion quest. However, it wasn't easy to save up magic crystals while living in Meteorite City, as everything cost magic crystals here. Even until now, she had only around 4,000 magic crystals, still far off from the 15,000 required. So long as you help me with the matter, I'll pay you 15,000 magic crystals as remuneration. How about it? Feng asked as he looked at Yu Luo. The ancient god's domain was a massive treasure trove, its value easily billions of times greater than a grade 1 or vein. It was no wonder 3 of the 5 great super guilds had deemed it worthwhile to work together to seal off the Earthfall's secret land. If such a secret became public, the consequences would be unimaginable. Of course, acquiring the various resources of the ancient god's domain wouldn't be an easy task either, since the base currency used here was the magic crystal, something relatively rare in the modern god's domain. And while the ancient god's domain had an abundance of magic crystals, it would be nigh impossible for modern players to earn a large amount of magic crystals here. After all, the modern god's domain was inferior to the ancient god's domain in almost every aspect. For players living in the modern god's domain, visiting the ancient god's domain would be equivalent to Stone Age people visiting the modern era. Modern players would need to work hard to earn magic crystals here. Fortunately, it wasn't completely impossible for modern players to earn money in the ancient era. One way to do so would be to take advantage of the unskillful handling of problems relating to the mind and soul in the ancient god's domain, particularly when it came to healing one's mental state. The ancient god's domain was actually far weaker than the modern god's domain in this aspect. This point was obvious from the gap between the concentration recovery potions sold on the market and those made by Cooling Cloud, an advanced master alchemist. In short, there were very few methods available for players to recover their concentration. Moreover, the death penalty here even placed players in a mentally weakened state for long periods, which prevented them from exhibiting their full strength. This meant that methods that could help heal the soul and mind were incredibly valuable. Okay. Yu Luo agreed immediately, understanding that Feng was trying to help her. What do you need me to do? Taking out a crystal of souls from his bag, Feng said, take this crystal of souls and consign it to the auction house for now. You're a member of the local Knight Legion, so you should be able to spread information about it quickly. Just say that this is the crystal of souls that healed Angelica Teresa and that it has a minor soul strengthening effect, which can increase one's chances of passing the Tier 4 promotion quest. Can you do that? No problem. If it is only publicizing the crystal, I can probably inform the whole city in just a few hours, Yu Luo said, nodding as she accepted the crystal of souls. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She had personally witnessed the crystal of souls' effects, so she knew that Feng was indeed telling the truth. As for the aid the crystal could provide in the Tier 4 promotion quest, it was partly true. After all, if one's soul got strengthened, one's learning ability would improve as well. Hence, it couldn't be considered an outright lie. Meanwhile, spreading this news throughout the city was a piece of cake for her as a member of the local Knight Legion. Yu Luo left the hotel room to get the word out, while Lifeless Thorn and the others went to their respective rooms to sort out their thoughts and prepare themselves to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests. Once Feng was alone in his room, he took out a memory crystal from his bag. This crystal was none other than the complete legacy guidance crystal he had obtained from killing Tedelia. The effects of this room are excellent. My perception is strengthened by a further 30% compared to the outside world. Now that I have some time to myself, I can give it a try. Immediately afterward, Feng took out 100 magic crystals and activated the legacy guidance crystal. Chapter 2772, Breakthrough inside the quiet and spacious living room. As Feng continuously poured mana into the legacy guidance crystal in his hand, divine runes and magic arrays began appearing all over the crystal one after another. A short moment later, the mana inside the room started surging toward the memory crystal. Afterward, the crystal radiated a dark blue glow that enveloped Feng. What a powerful legacy! Feng was astonished when the blue light engulfed him. This was because the owner of this legacy wasn't an ordinary person but someone known as the Saint of the Ice World. The quality of this legacy was far superior to that of ordinary legacies. In addition, the Ice World Saint's legacy explained a lot about the ice element's operating principles and described some basic methods to construct one's mana body using the ice element as the basis. This sort of legacy guidance was incredibly rare in God's domain. In most cases, legacy guidances only provided a demonstration of the manipulation of magic elements and some explanations of their operating principles. The chances of a legacy guidance containing a demonstration of how to construct a mana body from scratch were less than 0.1%, let alone a saint's guidance and demonstration. Existences holding the title of saint were either gods or existences approaching gods. Some saints were even existences that gods feared greatly because a saint represented the epitome of a certain aspect in God's domain. Not even gods could match a saint in their specialty. In other words, while a saint could be a god wouldn't necessarily be a saint. The requirement to become a Tier 6 god wasn't to achieve the extreme of a certain aspect. Instead, one only needed to reach a certain threshold. As to what that threshold was, only those who had actually reached Tier 6 would know. Meanwhile, the Ice World Saint had undoubtedly attained the ultimate in the manipulation of the ice element. Hence, the Ice World Saint's control over the ice element was undoubtedly superior to everyone else's. Even gods wouldn't be a match for the Ice World Saint. Following this, time passed by, second after second. As Feng injected more mana into the memory crystal, the Ice World Saint's demonstration sped up. The information the saint conveyed also became increasingly complicated. Half an hour later, the saint's demonstration ended. Feng, who had been focused on the demonstration the entire time, felt mesmerized by the information he learned. What a pity. The guidance barely talked about elements other than the ice element. If the guidance for the other elements were as detailed as the one for the ice element, my control over the magic elements would definitely reach the Grandmaster standard. At that time, I might even stand a chance against superior mythic monsters. Feng sighed ruefully when the demonstration video disappeared. He had to admit that the existences granted the title of saint were indeed powerful. Saints who had reached the ultimate in control of a specific magic element were especially amazing. Their understanding and explanation of magic elements were incredibly enlightening. However, the Ice World Saint's explanation became increasingly complicated as it progressed, and Feng found himself struggling to understand the lecture. It felt as if the saint's explanation had gone from talking about 1 dimension to 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions. He could still understand up to the 3rd dimension, but when the explanation progressed to the 4th dimension, his mind failed to comprehend the saint's thinking. Despite understanding the surface meaning of the saint's words, he couldn't understand how to apply them in practice. Hence, Feng could only treat the magic element usage methods explained at the end as gibberish. Nevertheless, he had still made massive gains. At the very least, he had made qualitative improvements in manipulating and understanding the ice element. Now, all he needed to do was experiment with his newfound knowledge. This Ice World Saint's legacy is truly extraordinary. I will have to get Violet Cloud and the others to study it earnestly. It would simply go to waste if given to someone without an affinity with the ice element. Feng now placed even greater importance on the legacy guidance crystal in his hand. He wouldn't have if it were any other legacy guidance, but this was a saint's guidance they were talking about. The Ice World Saint's guidance even provided such detailed information about the magic elements. Giving this legacy guidance to someone without an affinity with the magic elements would be a complete and utter waste. In fact, had he used this legacy guidance crystal in the modern god's domain instead of the ancient god's domain, he would have wasted a precious opportunity. If the information he absorbed from watching the legacy guidance here consisted of only 20% of the total information, then he probably would have failed to comprehend even 5% of the information had he watched it in the modern god's domain. After all, he didn't possess much affinity with the ice element, he was much more attuned to the fire element. Fortunately, the environment in the ancient god's domain was excellent, and it drastically improved his affinity with and perception of the ice element. Now, he could perceive the ice element much more clearly than he could the fire element when he was in the modern god's domain. After absorbing the Ice World Saint's legacy guidance, Feng took out a drop of soul water and drank it, boosting his concentration recovery and energizing his brain. Immediately afterward, he began attempting to break through his mana body's 100% threshold by constructing a new and simpler control array to link and control the various magic arrays all over his mana body. Previously, I insisted on using only one mana manipulation method to control the magic arrays of my body. On the other hand, the Ice World Saint constructed his mana body with the ice element and used several mana manipulation methods to gather and manipulate the ice element. For now, I should follow his example and try using 2 manipulation methods to control my mana body's magic arrays. After thinking up to this point, Feng began experimenting. Previously, he had been controlling the magic arrays on his mana body according to the mana body's construction because he believed this was the only way to manipulate the mana in his mana body. However, his thoughts changed after seeing the Ice World Saint using multiple mana manipulation methods to control the magic elements in his mana body. Master magicians like Feng excelled in attacking from multiple fronts. Since he couldn't break through the 100% threshold by attacking from only a single front, he would try attacking from multiple fronts simultaneously, which would allow him to maximize the effects of every magic array. Subsequently, the intensity of the mana Feng's body radiated fluctuated repeatedly. Sometimes, his mana didn't even reach the standard of ordinary Tier 3 players. Sometimes, it would far surpass the times he had fully exerted himself. He experimented for 3 consecutive hours and tested several dozen mana manipulation methods. From his experimentation, he concluded that using multiple methods simultaneously to manipulate his mana body was incredibly difficult. Even with his current concentration standard, he could just barely implement 3 at a time. However, the benefits of a threefold manipulation method were also evident. He had directly broken through the 100% threshold and reached the legendary 112% mark. Unfortunately, when implementing a threefold manipulation method, his mind would be so occupied that he couldn't execute a bronze combat technique, much less a mana technique. Hence, to maintain his combat power, Feng had no choice but to abandon a threefold manipulation method for a twofold manipulation method. 87%. 102%. 99%. The completion rate of Feng's mana body changed constantly. At the same time, the rate at which he expended his concentration also increased. This is the last option that suits me. I'll be satisfied so long as it goes beyond 103%. Of the various twofold manipulation methods Feng had tried, the best one produced a result of 103%. However, he wasn't particularly satisfied with it. After all, he had already experienced what having a mana body with 112% of its potential unlocked felt like, and it was a truly amazing experience. Meanwhile, after combining the manipulation method of light-shadow, the mana technique he frequently used, with his original mana manipulation method and continuously refining the combination, he had produced what he deemed to be the best combination currently possible. If this one still didn't work, he would have no choice but to settle for the 103% manipulation method. Taking a deep breath, Feng opened his eyes abruptly and began manipulating the magic arrays inside his mana body. Immediately, the magic arrays began operating one after another, drawing upon the ambient mana in the room. The mana density around him increased steadily. 120%. 134%. 157%. As the density of the mana surrounding Feng increased, the sensitivity of his 5 senses also improved slightly. Although the improvement was minor, there was no doubt that they had improved. The next moment, the numerous magic arrays all over Feng's mana body began combining into a super large magic array. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU boom. Suddenly, a ripple of mana spread from Feng's body and surged toward the surrounding walls. The mana inside the living room then stilled. However, a moment later, every bit of mana inside the room converged around Feng, a faint layer of mist forming around him. If one did not possess an acute sensitivity to mana, they would most likely have difficulty noticing this layer of condensed mana flowing over Feng's body. System, congratulations. You have successfully surpassed the mana body's 100% threshold and achieved a 110% completion rate. Chapter 2773, Mana Beyond the Limit. Upon hearing the system's voice ringing by his ears, Feng revealed a rare expression of joy. A 110% completion rate. Sure enough, integrating the mana manipulation method of mana techniques is the way to go. The mana manipulation method of light shadow was much more refined than the methods he had thought up by himself, especially in the aspect of manipulating magic elements. His own manipulation methods utilized only the 4 major elements, while light shadow utilized both the 4 major elements and the 7 supreme elements. Due to this difference, he had managed to unlock his mana body's potential to 110% with just a twofold manipulation method. And although there was only a 7% difference between this twofold manipulation method and his previous best method, passed the 100% threshold. Every 1% increase provided significant improvements to the mana body. The difference between a 103% mana body and 110% mana body was like the difference between heaven and earth. Subsequently, Feng punched at the empty space before him. Boom! All of a sudden, the living room's stable space shattered, spatial cracks forming one after another. Only after extending to the living room's wall and coming into contact with the magic barrier did this phenomenon stop. What an amazing result! Feng was astonished as he looked at the fractured space before him. His mana body had truly undergone a qualitative transformation after reaching a 110% completion rate. Now, even his normal punches carried a hint of a mana technique's power. Moreover, he didn't even need to manipulate his mana actively to gain such an effect. Afterward, Feng closed his eyes and felt his surroundings. Even with his eyes closed, he could still perceive the entire room within his mind. Not even a speck of dust escaped his perception. Not only has my physique improved by at least 30%, but even my 5 senses have risen to the next level. In my present state, my perception is just slightly inferior to a demon prince's. Feng opened his eyes, an ecstatic look appearing on his face. Although he still wasn't Fabrero's equal in terms of physique and 5 senses, he was much closer to matching the demon prince than before. This was undoubtedly joyous news for him. Originally, he felt that a Tier 4 player needed a legendary weapon to contend with a Tier 4 demon prince. After all, the difference in physique between the two was massive. However, Feng now felt that it might just be possible for players to gain the astonishing physique of a demon prince while still at Tier 4. After all, his current mana body was only at a 110% completion rate, yet he was already close to matching a demon prince's physique. If he could push his mana body to the rumored 120% completion rate, his physique then might match that of a demon prince. Feng was relatively confident of pushing his mana body to a 120% completion rate. After all, he had already proven that utilizing multiple manipulation methods to control his mana body was the way to go. At the very least, he wouldn't be utterly clueless about how to develop his mana body, unlike before. All he needed to do was figure out how to improve on this aspect. Now that I've reached the limits of twofold manipulation, I'll need to raise my concentration standard so that I can execute threefold manipulation fluidly. This way, I'll have a high chance of achieving a 120% completion rate. At that time, whether it is that divine dragon's trial or that mysterious NPC, I won't be utterly helpless. At this point, confidence welled up within Feng. However, for safety's sake, I should first gather the Solomon's sword fragments. If I have the complete Solomon's sword, I won't have to fear going up against even true Tier 5 existences. After thinking up to this point, Feng felt that he needed to resolve his matters in the ancient era quickly and return to the modern era to secure the remaining 2 fragments of Solomon's sword. Previously, he still hadn't been particularly confident of securing the 2 remaining fragments. However, now that his epic mana body had reached a 110% completion rate, he could probably solo even superior mythic monsters of the same level. The reason for his confidence was the qualitative transformation his mana had undergone. Originally, the mana flowing inside his mana body was merely gaseous, albeit of incredibly high density. However, after his epic mana body had reached a 110% completion rate, the mana flowing within it had thoroughly condensed into a mist. Moreover, it had achieved this state without him needing to manipulate external mana. Since God's domain's foundation was mana, the strength of a player's mana had a huge impact on their combat power, especially when using skills and spells. A skill powered with mist-like mana wouldn't just be 30% or 50% stronger than a skill powered with gaseous mana. Instead, the two would be on completely different levels. Why were superior mythic monsters so much more powerful than mythic monsters of the same level? It was because their physique and the quality of the mana inside their bodies were superior to ordinary mythic monsters. Currently, although Feng's physique still wasn't a match for superior mythic monsters, the quality of his mana was already on par with theirs. That, combined with the weapons and equipment he possessed, made it entirely possible for him to offset the difference and fight against superior mythic monsters on an equal footing. As Feng was immersing himself in the effects of his improved mana, Yu Luo suddenly contacted him. Guild leader Black Flame, information on the Crystal of Souls has already spread across Meteorite City. Many player forces and even NPC forces have expressed interest in the crystal. All of them are requesting to purchase it at a high price, Yu Luo said excitedly. The Skyflare adventurer team, one of the top 3 player forces in the city, contacted me, saying they are willing to purchase the crystal for 150,000 magic crystals. If it were in the modern god's domain, 150,000 magic crystals would be equivalent to 60,000 gold. That was already enough money to arm a 100-man team to the teeth. In Meteorite City, 150,000 magic crystals could still fully gear a player in level 150 epic equipment. That won't be necessary. Since we said we would auction it, we will do just that. If they wish to buy it, they can buy it through the auction, Feng said, shaking his head. The offer of 150,000 magic crystals was indeed incredibly high. If the Crystal of Souls were to be auctioned in the modern god's domain, it definitely wouldn't sell for such a high price. In fact, it would be a miracle if he could sell it for 50,000 magic crystals. However, it was a different story in the ancient god's domain, where methods to recover from a mentally weakened state were incomparably rare. In fact, the streets of Meteorite City were littered with players in mentally weakened states. All of these players could only rely on the city's dense mana to slowly recover. After players fell into a mentally weakened state, a full recovery would take a very long time, even with the help of dense mana. If these players were willing to stay cooped up in Meteorite City without leaving to grind even once, they would still need around 2 weeks to recover. Yet, it was simply impossible for expert players to stay inactive for such a long period. A period of 2 weeks was already enough to create a huge gap between expert players. In fact, even dying twice wouldn't cost as much as remaining inactive for 2 weeks. Hence, an excellent recovery item like the Crystal of Souls was considerably precious to the ancient god's domain's players and NPCs. Meanwhile, his purpose in holding the auction this time was simply to find out the market price for the Crystal of Souls. Only after doing so could he maximize his profits. After all, he didn't have a lot of Crystals of Souls on hand since he didn't kill a lot of monsters that were 5 levels higher than himself and at the Great Lord rank or above. Not to mention, he would also use some of the crystals normally. As a result, he only had 43 Crystals of Souls saved up. On the other hand, he had plenty of soul water. At this time, he already had 2,764 drops accumulated. This was the fruit of long-term accumulation. Although he had given out a lot of soul water to the guild members using the bronze and silver legacy tablets, he still had a lot remaining. However, the soul water's effects were significantly inferior to those of the Crystal of Souls. If the Crystal of Souls couldn't sell for a high price, then the soul water naturally wouldn't sell for much either. But now that Skyflare is also competing for the Crystal of Soul, both player and NPC forces will most likely step aside out of respect for Skyflare. After all, aside from Skyflare's commander, one of Skyflare's vice-commanders is rumored to have also reached Tier 4 already, Yu Luo explained. She naturally understood Feng's thoughts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, the various powers won't pick a fight with Skyflare just for one Crystal of Souls. If you go through with the auction, I'm afraid it won't go for a high price. This world was different from the world they came from. The NPC cities here were separated by great distances. Only after reaching Tier 4 would players be able to travel between NPC cities without worry. Tier 3 players could only roam the vicinity of the main city they belonged to. This meant that players residing in the same city would often come across each other. Meanwhile, Tier 4 combatants were considered true powerhouses in God's domain. Even NPCs feared them greatly, all the more the player forces. If one angered the Skyflare adventurer team, one shouldn't even think about leaving the city to grind for levels anymore. A player force is suspected to have 2 Tier 4 players? Feng was surprised by this revelation. He never thought that the player forces in the ancient god's domain would be so powerful to actually have two Tier 4 players, one more than what Zero Wing had. Although the search for legacy lands played a huge factor in this disparity, it wasn't so easy for players to complete their Tier 4 promotion quest either. Immediately, he said, "How about this? I'll rent a hall at the auction house, and we'll organize a small auction of our own. Announce that we will be selling a total of 5 crystals of souls, in addition to 50 drops of soul water, which is a slightly inferior version of the crystals. If we do that Skyflare adventurer team will have difficulty monopolizing everything." Feng's words surprised Luo. She never thought he would actually have other concentration recovery treasures besides the Crystal of Souls. He was practically a walking treasure trove. Moreover, if Feng were to sell so many crystals of souls and soul water, Skyflare would indeed have difficulty monopolizing everything. There was no way the various powers in the city would step aside in the face of such numbers. After all, aside from being useful for healing the mind, these treasures could also increase by a small margin one's odds of completing the Tier 4 promotion quest. Not to mention, Skyflare wasn't the only power in the city with Tier 4 combatants. "Okay. I'll spread this information right away." Luo nodded, then promptly disconnected the call. Feng notified Lifeless Thorn and the others of his plans before making his way toward Meteorite City's auction hall by himself. In the meantime, Luo also spread the news regarding the crystals of souls and soul water, instantly causing a sensation throughout the city. Chapter 2774, Ancient Legacy Inheritor Meteorite City, Skyflare Hotel. The Skyflare adventurer team was one of the top 3 powers of Meteorite City, and the Skyflare Hotel it owned was one of the city's landmarks. Not only did the hotel boast 19 floors, but it even occupied the largest plot of land in the city's business district, with roughly the footprint of a sports stadium. The Skyflare Hotel also had the best resting environment in Meteorite City. Due to its relatively reasonable prices, it had become the first choice of many players and NPCs for lodging. The hotel was so popular that it ranked within the top 10 most profitable businesses of Meteorite City. At this time, a level 131 female assassin clad in pitch-black epic equipment walked into the Skyflare Hotel's top-floor lounge. She then stopped before an imposing man sorting documents behind an office table. This imposing, middle-aged man was none other than the Skyflare adventure team's commander, Lionheart, nicknamed Raging Lion. "Commander, I've already looked into the person you mentioned. She's Luo, a cleric from the Night Legion. She's the one responsible for spreading the information across the city. Not long ago, she made another announcement stating that her side will be hosting a small auction at the auction house. They will be selling 5 crystals of souls and 50 drops of soul water, which is an inferior version of the Crystal of Souls," the black-clad assassin reported. She then passed a memory crystal to Lionheart and continued, "There is a record of her image in there. From what I found out, she seems to be a proxy. The real seller should be the party of 5 people that entered Meteorite City with the Night Legion. I included a record of their appearances in the crystal. Of the 5, the cloaked man walking in the lead is verified to be a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. However, I did not find any records of him appearing within Meteorite City's vicinity." "Good job," said the crimson light armor-clad Lionheart, who had reached level 133. After glancing at the images recorded in the memory crystal, he nodded and looked toward the several vice commanders inside the lounge. He then asked calmly, "What do you guys think of this matter?" "They're simply picking a fight with Skyflare. We've already shown a lot of respect to that Sword Emperor by offering such a high price, yet they still refuse to reciprocate," sneered a gloomy man standing beside the French window. "I think we need to teach these outsiders a lesson. If they wish to mingle in Meteorite City, they need to know their limits. The treasure in question can increase the success rate of completing the Tier 4 promotion quest. We absolutely cannot let the other powers in the city get their hands on it." The 3 other vice commanders present nodded in agreement with the gloomy man, Wind Chaser. Although Wind Chaser was a cold and ruthless person, he was incredibly loyal to the Skyflare adventurer team. Most importantly, Wind Chaser was a Tier 4 Nightwalker. When it came to assassination, he was undoubtedly the best player in Meteorite City. In terms of top combatants, the Skyflare Adventurer team was already the strongest player force in Meteorite City. Simply put, this was the best opportunity for the Skyflare Adventurer team to consolidate its grip on Meteorite City. Hence, how could they let other player forces gain an opportunity to rise up? Now that the several outsiders were showing no respect to their adventurer team, they definitely needed to teach these outsiders a lesson. It didn't matter even if the other party had a Tier 4 Sword Emperor on its side. After all, not only did Wind Chaser hold a peak hidden class, but he had even inherited a special mana technique. So long as he was hidden in the darkness, he could potentially one-shot even Tier 4 MTs, let alone a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Well, let's go over and talk to him first. If we can agree on a good price, everybody can be happy. If not, it won't be too late to take action, Lionheart said after giving the matter some thought. Lionheart, too, agreed with Wind Chaser's opinion, especially about the Crystal of Souls, which could strengthen a player's soul by a small margin. After all, the strength of a player's soul would greatly affect their learning ability. Even a small boost to the soul would be a great help to players learning a Tier 4 skill or spell during their promotion quest. Hence, Skyflare had to obtain the Crystal of Souls. The 4 vice commanders present all nodded in agreement with Lionheart's decision. Biyao, find out that Sword Emperor's current location. I need to know right away, Lionheart ordered the black-clad assassin. Commander, don't you know how I operate? Smiling, the petite assassin named Crimson Biyao added, as soon as you told me to look into this matter, I set my sights on that Sword Emperor. Hence, I had people keep track of his every move. Currently, that Sword Emperor is at the auction house. By the looks of it, he plans to rent an auction hall to host a small auction. Good. Lionheart nodded in satisfaction as he looked at Crimson Biyao. Biyao, you and Chaser will follow me in secret. I'll meet with that Sword Emperor in person and find out his origins and purpose. Truthfully, he felt very curious about the Sword Emperor mentioned. Tier 4 players were still incredibly rare in the current God's domain. According to Skyflare's information network, most main cities had only one Tier 4 player. The main cities with 2 or 3 Tier 4 players were all cities with massive populations. Logically, after a player reached Tier 4, the first thing they should do was expand their influence in their city as much as possible, capitalizing on their advantage. However, this foreign Sword Emperor had actually chosen to visit another city. It was simply inconceivable. Understood. Crimson Biyao and Wind Chaser responded respectfully. Meteorite City, Auction House. Meteorite City was a large trade city, and the auction house could be said to be the most prosperous place here. Not only was the local auction house much larger than the ones found in the modern God's domain's royal capitals, but its visitor traffic was also massive. A huge variety of products was on sale, including mana ore, which was quite rare in the modern God's domain, sold by the stack at dastardly cheap prices. One stack of 200 mana ores cost only 49 magic crystals. If sold in the modern God's domain, it would be bought out instantly. After all, mana ore was a byproduct of certain ores, and the chances of acquiring it were low. Hence, the price of mana ore in the modern world was already close to 30 silver coins per piece. Even then, supply was still tight. It's a pity I can't travel freely between the two worlds. Otherwise, I could definitely make a killing, and Zero Wing wouldn't have to worry about lacking funds and resources anymore. Feng sighed ruefully as he looked at the available items in the auction house. According to the old man's words, only 10 people could visit the ancient God's domain at a time. Moreover, while first-time visitors could get in for free, the second visit onward had a price. It might be fine if the price was reasonable, but if it was exorbitant, his visits to the ancient era would be limited. Although he could leave the visits to other people, the importance of the ancient God's domain was too significant. If the Earthfall's secret land's secret got out, every superpower on the continent would either try to annihilate Zero Wing or compete for the secret land. Feng spent 500 magic crystals to rent a small auction hall that could fit 200 people, at most. For Meteorite City's various powers, this number was already more than enough. After Feng finished making the necessary arrangements, an imposing and mighty man suddenly approached him. The man was clad in crimson light armor and carried a knight's shield with crimson runes. At the appearance of this imposing man, silence descended momentarily on the entire auction house. Everyone looked at this man in surprise, a hint of awe and admiration gleaming in the eyes of both players and NPCs. Crap. It's Lionheart. He looks so handsome. He looks much better than the photo on Skyflare's promotional posters. But, why is a big shot like him here? Could it be because of the news of that small auction? A discussion over Lionheart promptly broke out in the auction hall. Everyone couldn't help wondering why a VIP like Lionheart would personally visit the auction house. Skyflare's commander? He actually came in person? Yu Luo, who had just arrived in the auction house, gaped in shock and doubted her eyes when she saw Lionheart enter the building. Lionheart was an amazing individual. Despite having started with nothing in this ruthless world, the adventurer team he established had grown to the point where it managed to defeat several large guilds and become one of the top 3 powers in Meteorite City. In terms of achievements, the Skyflare adventurer team easily eclipsed the Heaven's Blade adventurer team. On the interstellar continent, living resources were incredibly scarce. Ordinary civilians couldn't hope to compare with large guilds in terms of the resources they could acquire. This was because large guilds generally had high-level authorities as backers. These authorities boasted resources and influence far greater than those of the large guilds on Earth. Just one word from these high-level authorities would be enough to allow a civilian who could barely feed themselves to move to the interstellar continent's core area. In the core area, one would be able to not only eat like a king but also enjoy recreational activities in the real world and appreciate the beauty of the vast universe. Just this point alone allowed large guilds to walk over civilian players with no background. Meanwhile, Lionheart was only a civilian on the interstellar continent. His development of Skyflare to such an extent was a remarkable feat. He was practically a legend among the civilians there. If he were in the modern god's domain, he would definitely become a noteworthy existence known throughout the mainland. The next moment, Lionheart stopped before Feng. Immediately, everyone in the auction house focused on Feng curiously, the stares making him feel very uncomfortable. You're the person selling the crystals of souls, right? Looking at Feng, Lionheart went straight to the point, saying, I am Lionheart, the Skyflare adventurer team's commander. You should have heard of me already. Of course, I've heard of you. In fact, I've heard a lot about you. Feng did not deny Lionheart's statement. Calmly, he asked, may I know what business you have with me? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Feng had gained plenty of information regarding Lionheart. The man was undoubtedly a powerhouse. Not only did he reach the domain realm, but he had even set foot onto the second step, the upper domain realm. The amount of time he had spent immersed in virtual reality games was much greater than that of the modern God's Domain's players. Rumor had it that Lionheart's control over mana had already reached the advanced Master Magician standard and that he was only half a step away from becoming a Grandmaster. In addition, Lionheart also possessed an ancient hidden class called the Blood Knight, which gave him the strongest defense among players. At this point, he was a complete monster when it came to defense. His terrifying defense was why the Skyflare adventurer team had managed to conquer plenty of powerful bosses. The adventurer team had even killed quite a few level 120 superior mythic bosses. Hence, Lionheart was also known as Meteorite's Wall by Meteorite City's players. This isn't a place to talk. Why don't we find a place to sit down and have a proper conversation? Lionheart suggested as he scrutinized Feng. When he saw Feng's special state, he was surprised and confused. However, he quickly set aside his surprise and treated Feng with the respect due a foreign Tier 4 expert. Sure. Feng nodded. He then turned to the empty space a short distance behind Lionheart and asked, are those two coming along too? Chapter 2775, Astronomical Transaction. Those two? Yu Luo was confused when she followed Shi Feng's gaze. After all, there was nobody there. Even when she pushed her perception as a Void Realm expert to the limit, she still couldn't sense any aura or presence of a living being. She didn't notice any unusual fluctuations in space either. Experts at the Void Realm would be aware of even the slightest disturbances around them. At the end of the day, an assassin's stealth only turned them invisible to the naked eye. They remained physically present in the world. So long as they moved, no matter how slow, they would cause some air turbulence. Such unnatural changes wouldn't escape the perception of a Void Realm expert. Hence, even a Void Realm assassin generally couldn't get within 30 yards of other Void Realm experts undetected. Normally, they could operate only outside the 30-yard radius. As for assassins at the Domain Realm, while they could perform better, they still wouldn't be able to get within 20 yards of Void Realm experts undetected. And even if they did manage this feat, they would be able to maintain it for only a matter of seconds. However, the spot Shi Feng was currently looking at was within 20 yards of himself. Moreover, the conversation between Shi Feng and Lionheart had lasted more than a few seconds already. Even a Domain Realm expert wouldn't be able to stay hidden for so long. Upon hearing Shi Feng's words, Lionheart was slightly surprised. Simultaneously, a hint of alertness and admiration appeared in his eyes. Amazing. As expected of a Tier 4 expert capable of moving between main cities. Part of the reason Lionheart had brought Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow with him this time was to test Shi Feng's strength. Crimson Billow was ranked second in Skyflare in terms of stealth. Utilizing her advantages as a Domain Realm expert, she had created a unique concealment technique that allowed her to maintain a high degree of stealth despite being in motion. Meanwhile, after combining this technique with a potion that hid one's life aura, let alone Tier 3 Domain Realm experts, even Tier 4 Domain Realm experts wouldn't detect her even when she was within 20 yards of them. Of course, Tier 4 Domain Realm experts would definitely detect her once she got within 16 yards of them. Even so, being able to conceal herself to such an extent was already more than enough for her to rank at the top of Meteorite City and instill fear into Tier 4 experts. Wind Chaser was even more powerful. After reaching Tier 4, his stealth skill was no longer limited to just turning his physical body invisible and concealing his life aura. Instead, the skill would place his body in a shadow space. No matter what he did inside this space, it wouldn't affect the outside world. Naturally, others wouldn't be able to detect his movements while he was inside this shadow space. In fact, despite knowing about Wind Chaser's ability, Lionheart hadn't realized that Wind Chaser was already standing within 20 yards of him. Nevertheless, Shi Feng had stated that there were two people behind Lionheart. This meant that he had detected both Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser. Chaser, Billow, you two can show yourselves now, Lionheart said, smiling as he looked at the empty space Shi Feng indicated. No need to hide anymore. As soon as Lionheart finished speaking, two figures gradually appeared in that empty space. They were none other than Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow. The two assassins were looking at Shi Feng with eyes brimming with surprise and confusion. Commander, did I show some irregularities just now? Crimson Billow quietly asked Lionheart through the team chat. Afraid that she would get detected, she had deliberately maintained a 21-yard distance between herself and Shi Feng. After all, she hardly knew anything about Shi Feng, apart from the fact that he was a Tier 4 expert, and she didn't wish to ruin Lionheart's attempt at probing Shi Feng's strength. Yet, despite the 21-yard distance, he still detected her. Excluding Lionheart, this was the first time a Tier 4 individual perceived her from beyond 20 yards. You didn't. It's just that this person is much stronger than we thought, Lionheart responded, shaking his head. Don't act rashly against him afterward. Shi Feng had discovered not only Crimson Billow but also Wind Chaser. While defeating a Tier 4 expert like Shi Feng would be simple for the current Skyflare, killing him would be incredibly difficult. Unless absolutely necessary, they had best not offend this Sword Emperor. In response, both Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser nodded silently. The trio had conversed for only 2 or 3 seconds, so outsiders did not find anything wrong with the situation. They merely saw Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow approaching Lionheart slowly after making their appearance. When Yu Luo, who stood beside Shi Feng, saw the two assassins walking over, her eyes widened in shock. There really are two people. Despite the two assassins being so close to her, she actually failed to notice either of them. This overturned her understanding of the assassin class. Meanwhile, when Shi Feng saw the two assassins, a hint of wariness also appeared in his eyes. The two assassins were astonishingly strong. This was especially true for Wind Chaser. If not for the recent breakthrough Shi Feng achieved with his mana body, which granted him a physique and perception far superior to ordinary Tier 4 individuals, he would have most likely failed to notice Wind Chaser's presence. If Wind Chaser really were intent on targeting a specific player, it would be a nightmare for the said player. After all, the Tier 4 assassin was capable of suddenly appearing within 20 yards of his target without giving off any indications, a distance that any Tier 4 combatant could cross in the blink of an eye. If Shi Feng was not careful, even he might end up falling prey to Wind Chaser's ambush. "Let's head to a reception room to continue our conversation," Lionheart suggested to Shi Feng. "Sure." Shi Feng did not object to the proposal. His original goal in coming to the ancient god's domain was to acquire a large amount of resources. Meanwhile, the best way to do so was by partnering with a local tyrant. He could gather resources much faster this way than if he did it by himself. In fact, he could even gain access to items that normally wouldn't appear on the market. Lionheart's taking the initiative to seek him out was naturally good news for Shi Feng. Lionheart led Shi Feng and Yu Luo to the top-floor reception room he had reserved beforehand. "Commander Lionheart." After taking his seat, Shi Feng went straight to the point, saying, "Please just say what you have to say. There is no need for us to waste both our time by playing around with words. You really are a straightforward person, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart smiled at Shi Feng's words. "I was thinking the same thing. In that case, I'll be blunt with you. Skyflare wishes to purchase all of the crystals of souls and soul water you are selling. It seems you are very ambitious, Commander Lionheart. You actually plan to monopolize Meteorite City?" Shi Feng didn't feel particularly surprised at Lionheart's declaration. Calmly, he said, "Of course, we can go with such an arrangement as well. Only, I have quite a number of these items, and I'm afraid your adventurer team can't swallow them all." As soon as Shi Feng finished speaking, Wind Chaser, who stood behind Lionheart, laughed. "What a joke. There is nothing in Meteorite City that our adventurer team cannot swallow." Looking at Shi Feng, Wind Chaser sneered, "Of course, that is under the premise that your price is fair." At Wind Chaser's provocation, Shi Feng simply shook his head and smiled. "Truthfully, even at 150,000 magic crystals per crystal of souls, you won't be able to afford everything. Not to mention, there is still the soul water." He had a total of 43 crystals of souls. If he sold each for 150,000 magic crystals, that would equate to 6.45 million magic crystals. Even though the ancient god's domain was rich in resources, a player force with a sphere of activity limited to just one city couldn't take out such an amount. At Shi Feng's words, Wind Chaser, who initially planned to probe Shi Feng further, fell silent. There was no way a Tier 4 expert like Shi Feng wouldn't know about the Skyflare adventurer team's status and general wealth in Meteorite City. For Shi Feng to say such words meant he had absolute confidence backing him. Meanwhile, after hearing Shi Feng's response, both Yu Luo and Crimson Billow couldn't help gasping. They never thought that Shi Feng would actually be so wealthy. They had already investigated the Crystal of Souls, so they knew it was a precious treasure that wasn't obtained easily. Yet, Shi Feng had just declared that Skyflare couldn't afford to purchase all his stock. This proved that Shi Feng had a lot of crystals of souls on hand. Who knew how many Tier 4 experts one could create with so many crystals of souls? "You truly are extraordinary, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart immediately broke into a smile. Moreover, this was a very sincere smile. "I apologize to you on behalf of my brother. At the same time, I also hope that the Skyflare adventurer team can form a long-term partnership with you. What do you think? I admit that Skyflare cannot take out the necessary magic crystals to purchase all your crystals of souls. However, our adventurer team still ranks within the top 3 of Meteorite City's player forces in daily income. We might not be able to swallow everything in one bite, but I'm sure we can do so after several or a dozen bites. Furthermore, I can assure you that not only will we purchase each crystal of souls for 200,000 magic crystals, but we will also ensure a weekly transaction of 3 million magic crystals at a minimum. May I know what you think of this, Brother Black Flame? Yu Luo gaped in shock at Lionheart's words despite herself. She never imagined that the Skyflare adventurer team had such astonishing wealth. Even the superpowers in the modern god's domain were far from comparable to Skyflare in magic crystal acquisition. Moreover, Lionheart even raised the price of the Crystal of Souls to 200,000 magic crystals. Skyflare was probably the only power in Meteorite City capable of offering such a price. After all, a piece of fragmented legendary equipment cost only around 500,000 magic crystals, while fragmented legendary weapons cost around 1 million magic crystals. Lionheart's promise of a weekly transaction of 3 million magic crystals meant Skyflare was trading away 3 fragmented legendary weapons every week. Commander? At this time, even Wind Chaser was stunned by Lionheart's offer. The Skyflare adventurer team operated only in Meteorite City's vicinity, and there were only so many resources available in the area. If Skyflare really pushed through with this transaction, the adventurer team would have to tighten its belt and strictly limit its future expenditures. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Okay, I can agree to those conditions, Feng said, nodding. After giving the matter some thought, he felt that this price was probably the best he could get for the crystals of souls. Even if he could get a higher price at an auction, it wouldn't be much higher. However, before this, I wish to test you, Commander Lionheart. We can verify our transaction depending on your performance. What do you think? Test our commander? Feng's words infuriated Wind Chaser. Crimson Billow's complexion also darkened, a hint of hostility appearing in her eyes as she looked at Feng. Even super guilds would not dare say that they wished to test their commander's qualifications for cooperation, yet a person of unknown origin actually did so. Feng was utterly looking down on the Skyflare adventurer team. However, before Wind Chaser or Crimson Billow could say anything else, Lionheart extended a hand to stop them. He then looked at Feng with a glint of determination in his eyes as he asked, "May I know how you wish to conduct your test, Brother Black Flame?" "Simple. So long as you survive a hit from me, you'll pass," Feng said decisively. Chapter 2776, Duel Between Sword and Shield, Survive a Hit from You? Lionheart was momentarily stunned by Feng's words. Even Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow fell into a daze for a long time. They felt that Feng was simply toying with the Skyflare adventurer team. Looking at Feng, Wind Chaser asked to verify, "Are you sure this is your condition? Do you know what title our commander holds in Meteorite City?" Initially, Wind Chaser thought that Feng would make things difficult for them to invalidate this transaction. Yet, Feng's condition for partnership was simply for Lionheart to survive a hit from him. This test was beyond simple. Let alone Tier 4 players, even superior mythic monsters were incapable of one-shotting Lionheart. The Skyflare adventurer team had relied precisely on Lionheart's overwhelming defense to develop to its current extent. It would be a complete and utter joke to say that a Tier 4 player could one-shot Lionheart. For a moment, Wind Chaser even suspected that Feng had never bothered looking into Lionheart's information. Either that or the man thought that Lionheart's fame was exaggerated. "Of course. I'm very certain." Feng nodded earnestly. Yu Luo also couldn't help looking at Feng strangely. She simply couldn't understand why Feng would set such a meaningless condition. She knew that Feng was indeed very strong. This was evident from how he repelled over a dozen Tier 3 demon leaders with one move. However, Lionheart wasn't a pushover, either. The achievements he had today were piled up through innumerable battles. Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow turned to Lionheart. Although they didn't know what Lionheart thought of this matter, Feng's test presented no problem to them. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to call it a free pass. Meanwhile, so long as their two sides entered into a partnership, the Skyflare adventurer team would be able to gain full control over Meteorite City easily. In fact, it wouldn't be long before they could start establishing branches in other NPC main cities. And even if the player forces of the other cities opposed Skyflare's intrusion, they would have difficulty doing so. After all, what truly mattered in a fight between powers were Tier 4 combatants. Although the saying one Tier 4 player could easily go up against a countless number of Tier 3 players was indeed exaggerated, it was still a fact that Tier 4 players could do many things that Tier 3 players couldn't. This was the difference between tiers and life ratings. No problem. I agree to your condition, Lionheart said. After giving the matter some thought, he couldn't find any problems with Feng's condition. However, are we going to hold the test here? In Lionheart's opinion, Feng probably wasn't aware of the strength of his Blood Knight class. As one of the incredibly rare ancient legacies in God's domain, the skills it offered were far superior to ordinary peak legacies. Not to mention, he currently had 3 fragmented legendary items on him: the Bulwark of Holy Blood, the Void Magic Armor, and the Wind Wall Ring. Even when he had only the fragmented legendary shield and armor, he could already fend off superior mythic monsters. In fact, if not for the high HP and defense of superior mythic monsters, he could even solo these monsters, given enough time. Now that he had the Wind Wall Ring, his defensive capabilities had soared even further. I'm afraid this place isn't sufficient. We'll need to rent an advanced combat room, Feng said, shaking his head. In that case, let's go to our adventurer team Skyflare Hotel. There's a special combat room there. It should be enough for us to display our strengths, Lionheart suggested. A special combat room? Feng was surprised at Lionheart's words. He never thought that special combat rooms already existed in the ancient god's domain. Special combat rooms were far superior to advanced combat rooms. They were perfect for practicing skill and spell usage. However, special combat rooms simply weren't something that could be acquired at this stage of the game. Let's go to the Skyflare Hotel, then. Feng and Yuluo followed Lionheart's group to the Skyflare Hotel, which was only 1 block away from the auction house. The instant the group walked into the Skyflare Hotel, Yuluo grew a little excited. The Skyflare Hotel wasn't a place just anyone could enter and rest at. Aside from Skyflare's members and the members of Partnered Powers, who received a 50% discount, visitors would be charged the full price when staying at the hotel. Meanwhile, even the most basic room here cost 400 magic crystals per day. Even a Tier 3 Void Realm expert like herself wouldn't dare stay here for no good reason. Only when she needed to verify some theories and techniques she thought of would she make an exception and stay here. As for Feng, he felt as if he had just walked into a sacred training ground. The density of the mana here was truly amazing, much more than even in Stone Forest City's Freedom Hotel. In fact, the boost he got for his perception of magic elements was roughly 20% higher than what he got from the hotel he was currently staying at. No wonder he's so confident of being able to take out 3 million magic crystals per week. At this time, Feng finally understood why Lionheart was so confident in the Skyflare adventure team's abilities. Meanwhile, along with Feng and Yuluo's arrival, an uproar occurred among Skyflare's executives. I heard that guy named Black Flame wants to test the commander. What? That guy must be crazy. He thinks the commander is someone he can test. Even if the commander just stands there and does nothing, he won't be able to injure the commander in the slightest. It's not a standard PvP, though. He only wants the commander to take a hit from him. It seems this person is trying to show his strength to our adventurer team. He must be worried that he can't beat the commander, so he came up with that kind of condition. At that time, even if he fails to injure the commander, he could still salvage his reputation somewhat. When Skyflare's several dozen executives looked at Feng, who had already entered the special combat room, they promptly conducted hushed discussions among themselves. They all felt that Feng was pulling such a stunt because he wished to gain respect yet was also worried about making a fool of himself. However, in their opinion, Feng's actions were pointless. After all, when Lionheart dueled against other players, he almost never used his full strength to achieve victory. Even Wind Chaser, who had reached Tier 4 as well, had been almost helpless against Meteorite's wall. And although Wind Chaser had eventually emerged victorious in his duel against Lionheart, he had done so by dragging out the fight and chipping away at Lionheart's HP. Not to mention, this was in a situation where Lionheart had not gone all out. Otherwise, even Wind Chaser shouldn't think of harming Lionheart in the slightest. Shortly afterward, all of Skyflare's executives packed the special combat room's spectator stands. Some executives had even abandoned their quests to spectate this duel. Lionheart had never fought in a duel since Wind Chaser had gotten promoted to Tier 4. During this period, Lionheart had improved significantly. Not only did he gain a new Tier 4 legacy skill, but he had also obtained the fragmented legendary ranked Windwall ring, a defense-oriented ring. At this point, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that their commander's strength had already surpassed their imagination. While Skyflare's executives were eagerly waiting for the duel to begin, Feng and Lionheart were standing in the middle of the room's spacious battlefield. At this point, both fighters had already adjusted their conditions and were ready to take action at any time. "I'm ready. You can make your move whenever you want," Lionheart said as he raised his shield and longsword. From the crimson runes decorating the shield and longsword, it was evident the two were a set. Only, the mana gathered around the weapon was slightly inferior in quality compared to what was around the bulwark of the Holy Blood. At this time, Lionheart stopped concealing his statistics. Immediately, his HP of 16.6 million appeared for everyone to see, flaunting the high HP of a Tier 4 defensive class. It was evident that Lionheart planned to let Feng see his own strength. "He has 16.6 million HP. How is this possible?" Yu Luo gasped reflexively when she saw Lionheart's HP. As a defensive class player, Lionheart already possessed incredibly high defense, to begin with. Combined with his various defensive skills and HP, he was practically a boss monster. Yu Luo even doubted that Feng could one-shot Lionheart even if the latter did not defend himself. In fact, it would already be a miracle if Feng could remove 1/3 of Lionheart's HP in one hit. Amazing. Level 130 Tier 3 defensive classes usually have only 9 million HP on average, yet you have almost twice that, Feng said in admiration. "It's nothing. It's only because of my unique legacy." Lionheart didn't pay particular attention to Feng's words of appreciation. On the contrary, he wanted to use this opportunity to let Feng realize the Skyflare adventurer team's might. After all, Skyflare had already lost once to Feng before. He needed to reclaim this loss and level the playing field. "Since you're ready, I'll begin." Feng naturally understood what was going through Lionheart's mind. Unfortunately, Lionheart simply wasn't aware of Feng's aim. "Come." Lionheart readied his shield, a serious expression appearing on his face. Immediately afterward, not only did Lionheart's aura skyrocket in intensity, but a faint, blood-red barrier had also appeared around his body. Crap. The commander is getting serious. He's actually going all out and fully exerting his mana body right off the bat, one of Skyflare's vice commanders, a robust, level 132 shield warrior, said in astonishment. Blood armor. This was the Tier 4 legacy skill Lionheart obtained after achieving a 100% completion rate with his mana body. Although the magic barrier appeared flimsy, it could absorb up to 5 million damage. Moreover, the barrier would replenish itself once every 40 seconds. In other words, if one failed to cause over 5 million damage to Lionheart within 40 seconds, one had no chance of slaying him. Had Lionheart used this move during his duel with Wind Chaser back then, Wind Chaser wouldn't have been able to harm him at all. However, before Skyflare's members were done admiring their commander's Tier 4 passive skill, they saw Feng unsheath the abyssal blade. Immediately afterward, everyone clearly sensed the mana in the room trembling and freezing momentarily. Before anyone could react to the unexpected development, Feng raised the abyssal blade with both hands and looked at Lionheart. The mana inside the special combat room then began to boil, the phenomenon causing everyone present to shudder involuntarily. Afterward, everyone felt a wave of scorching heat wash over their body. How is this possible? When Wind Chaser sensed the mana around him boiling, he was stunned. After all, the space inside the special combat room was massive, with a 1,000-yard radius. That was more than enough for 2 Tier 4 players to fight to their heart's content. Nevertheless, Feng caused all of the mana inside the combat room to boil just by entering a stance. This kind of thing was simply unheard of. At this time, Lionheart's gaze also changed. If entering a stance was enough to trigger such a phenomenon, Feng's strength was definitely far more extraordinary than he initially thought. However, before Lionheart could take any further action, the flow of time inside the combat room seemed to slow down. The only thing capable of moving was apparently the sword in Feng's hands. Second sword, Holy Devour. As the long sword descended, an overwhelming pressure fell upon the room. Afterward, space within the room ignited, as if it couldn't withstand the terrifying and violent pressure. The resulting flames threatened to burn everything in the room into nothing. Not good. Holy Blood Wall. For Saints' Descent. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Upon seeing the boundless flames approaching him, Lionheart hurriedly activated the defensive skill Holy Blood Wall, then stabbed his shield into the ground and activated his strongest Tier 4 defensive legacy skill. The next moment, a twofold magic array appeared before the bulwark of Holy Blood, which was followed by an illusory crimson shield that was over 12 meters tall. Crimson runes flared all over Lionheart's body, solidifying the surrounding space until it was as sturdy as a steel wall. Meanwhile, the instant Lionheart used For Saints' Descent, the endless sea of flames devoured him like a giant beast. Boom! Accompanied by a thunderous explosion, the space within the special combat room transformed into a dark, empty void. Chapter 2777, Shocking Skyflare. A dark void enveloped the battlefield. Let alone Tier 3 players, even Tier 4 players couldn't survive in this space. Meanwhile, when Skyflare's executives, seated in the spectator stands, saw this scene, they were dumbfounded. How can one carry such destructive power? Even those Tier 4 NPCs aren't capable of exhibiting such power. Is he really just a Tier 4 player? He has such terrifying strength, yet we actually failed to find any information on him. Just who is he? After a moment of silence, Skyflare's executives began a heated discussion among themselves as they goggled at the battlefield's shattered space. At this time, they no longer underestimated Feng in the slightest. Now, only shock and fear filled their hearts. With such terrifying combat power, Feng was no longer an opponent vulnerable to Zerg tactics. Only powerful Tier 4 NPCs could match him. He was actually so strong. Tasu Luo's eyes were also wide with disbelief as she looked at the shattered space. Even Angelica Teresa's strongest attack would fall short of Feng's from what she could tell. Angelica Teresa was a peak-rank Tier 4 existence and one of the top 5 powerhouses of Meteorite City. In addition, as an NPC, the items and basic attributes she possessed were also far superior to players. Yet, Feng had actually executed an attack way stronger than even Angelica Teresa's strongest attack. Commander. The commander couldn't have fallen, right? After a while, Wind Chaser and the others snapped out of their daze and searched hurriedly for Lionheart's figure in the dark void. Out of the player attacks they had seen thus far, Feng's was undoubtedly the strongest. Even Tier 4 NPCs were unlikely to be capable of executing such an attack. Hence, although they knew that Lionheart possessed a heaven-defying defense, they couldn't help doubting his ability to survive Feng's attack. After everyone had searched for some time, the shattered space gradually recovered. Two vague figures appeared, standing in the recovering space, with one of them looking incredibly miserable. This is great. The commander is still alive. I knew the commander could withstand it. He is Meteorite's wall, after all. There's no way he can be one-shot by a player. When Skyflare's members saw Lionheart's figure, they immediately grew excited. However, unlike his colleagues, Lionheart did not feel happy or excited at all. Instead, his heart pounded with fear and relief. That was too close. If not for the Windwall ring, I would have definitely been one-shot. Lionheart smiled bitterly when he looked at his remaining HP. Currently, he had less than 6 million HP remaining. While this might seem like a lot, he had only managed to retain this amount of HP thanks to the Windwall ring's passive skill. The Windwall ring's passive skill, Wind's Protection, was capable of reducing all the damage he received by 35%. Even if he received a Tier 5 attack, its damage would still be reduced by a full 35%. Wind's Protection was also the Windwall ring's only skill. The Windwall ring was different from other equipment with passive damage reduction skills. Although the alternatives might even have skills offering much greater reductions than Wind's Protection on paper, there were hidden limits to these skills. Generally, their upper limit was Tier 4. Once an attack reached the Tier 4 standard, their effect would be significantly weaker. And against Tier 5 attacks, their effect was practically negligible. However, that was not the case for the Windwall ring's Wind's Protection. The skill's description clearly stated that it could reduce the damage of even Tier 5 attacks by 35% and not 1% less. On the other side, after Feng executed Holy Devour, his complexion had paled significantly. Is it still too much to execute this move? When Feng sensed that more than half of his concentration had disappeared, he was shocked. He had already developed his epic mana body to 110% completion rate, yet he still had trouble gathering and condensing the mana required to execute Holy Devour. For a moment, he couldn't help imagining what kind of power he could exhibit if he successfully executed the third sword, Holy Annihilation. Tier 5? Tier 6? Regardless, this is a good result. At the very least, I can now use the complete Holy Devour. Now, I should be able to cope, even against a half-step Demon King. As Feng sheathed the Abyssal Blade, he was satisfied with his previous attack. Although his mana had undergone a qualitative transformation, thanks to the improvement of his mana body, the improvement this change brought to his skills and spells was limited. It wasn't enough for them to undergo a qualitative transformation. However, it was a different story for mana techniques, whose power was highly dependent on the quality of the mana used. Now, if he went all out, he could execute an attack at the Tier 5 standard. The only drawback of Holy Devour was the huge burden it placed on his concentration. Even at peak condition, he could execute the complete Holy Devour only once. Nevertheless, it was already more than enough as a trump card. As Feng was savoring the experience of executing Holy Devour, Lionheart approached him. "Brother Black Flame, that move of yours really is ruthless. If I hadn't gained some improvements recently, I would have really died," Lionheart said jocularly. At this moment, Lionheart no longer underestimated or looked at Feng with contempt, only respect was present in his eyes. The fact that Feng had managed to execute such a move as a player meant that he already stood at the apex of the entire God's domain. Just this point alone was already more than enough to earn him everyone's respect. In God's domain, strength was everything. It was also something that could not be faked. For Feng to have developed himself to this extent, he must have experienced countless trials and hardships. "You're too humble, Commander Lionheart. The fact that you managed to block my attack is all due to your own ability, not luck." Looking at Lionheart, Feng added, "Now that our one-hit agreement is complete, according to our previous arrangement, I will supply the crystals of souls and soul water to only the Skyflare adventurer team from Meteorite City's side. Thank you. As for the matter of magic crystals, please rest assured. The Skyflare adventurer team definitely won't let you down, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart couldn't help feeling a little happy at Feng's words. With Feng willing to partner with Skyflare, Skyflare would be able to take full control of Meteorite City easily. Next, let's talk about the specifics of our transaction. Going straight to the point, Feng said, like I said before, so long as you manage to withstand one hit from me, I will agree to partner with you, Commander Lionheart. However, after we start our cooperation, I'll need your help with something. Of course, I won't have you help me for nothing. In exchange, I'll sell the crystals of souls at 150,000 magic crystals each to Skyflare. How about it? 150,000 each? Lionheart was slightly tempted. May I know what you need help with? Previously, when he offered to purchase the crystals of souls at 200,000 magic crystals each, the price was actually a little too high for Skyflare to bear. However, the crystals of souls were far too important. They would also play a crucial role when Skyflare attempted to conquer other main cities. Hence, he had gone through with the price. Lowering the price to 150,000 magic crystals each would definitely alleviate a lot of Skyflare's burden. Help me kill a boss, Feng said, smiling. The reason Feng wanted to test Lionheart wasn't just to experiment with the power of his upgraded mana body. He had also wished to see whether Lionheart could withstand the attack of a Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, if he didn't have anyone capable of tanking a hit from a Tier 4 infant dragon, slaying it would be utterly impossible. Since Lionheart clearly met this requirement, combined with the effects of the heavenly dragon's breath, challenging an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon was entirely feasible. Kill a boss? Lionheart was a little puzzled. He never thought Feng's request would be so simple. Is this boss very strong? Very strong. Not bothering to hide the truth, Feng said, it's a Tier 4 infant dragon. A Tier 4 infant dragon? Lionheart gasped at Feng's words. Immediately, he thought of something and asked, are you referring to the one Lady Angelica is trying to challenge? That's right. It's that one. Feng nodded. Actually, this matter is also beneficial to you as well, Commander Lionheart. After all, Meteorite City's promotion will attract more players and resources to the city. At that time, Skyflare can grow stronger together with the city. Lionheart nodded in agreement. In reality, he, too, wished for Meteorite City to grow stronger and become an advanced main city. However, the incredibly high difficulty of challenging a Tier 4 infant dragon made him decide to have Skyflare opt out of Angelica Teresa's expedition. After all, Skyflare already had 2 Tier 4 players under its command, and it had yet to stabilize its advantages. If Skyflare eagerly participated in the risky expedition and failed, the adventurer team would definitely lose a lot of its advantages. What do you think, Commander Lionheart? Feng asked. Previously, he didn't hold much hope for slaying the Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, a Tier 4 infant dragon was comparable to Tier 5 existences. It was much stronger than even a demon prince. Even though he could use the complete Holy Devour now, it wouldn't make any difference since he couldn't use the technique indefinitely. However, the story would change if Lionheart was present. The fact that Lionheart could survive a Tier 5 attack meant that he could defend against a Tier 4 infant dragon's attack. Okay. After thinking for a while, Lionheart gritted his teeth and agreed to Feng's condition. However, Brother Black Flame, as Skyflare has just gained some advantages, we cannot afford to invest everything into helping you. We can send only a 100-man team, at most. In response to Lionheart's worries, Feng simply chuckled and said, that's already more than enough. In fact, it's fine so long as Skyflare can dispatch its 2 Tier 4 players, let alone a 100-man team. May I know when we will begin the operation? Lionheart asked. Raiding a Tier 4 infant dragon was an important matter. Preparing the necessary manpower and supplies would take a lot of time. We're not in a rush right now. I'm afraid it will still take several days before we can set out, Feng said, shaking his head. I'll notify you when the time comes, Commander Lionheart. Challenging a Tier 4 infant dragon with just 3 Tier 4 players would be outright suicide. It wouldn't matter even if they had a large number of Tier 3 players supporting them. Fortunately, the ancient god's domain did not require players to search for their legacy lands to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests. So long as he had Lifeless Thorn and the others challenge their promotion quests and some of them succeeded, he would have a much greater chance of success. Alright. If that's the case, I can make more preparations on my side. Lionheart breathed out a sigh of relief at Feng's words. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Afterward, Feng signed a partnership contract with Lionheart to the effect that Skyflare would purchase crystals of souls from Feng at 150,000 magic crystals per crystal and soul water at 30,000 magic crystals per drop. For the first transaction, Skyflare purchased a total of 20 crystals of souls and 50 drops of soul water, the total expenditure amounting to 4.5 million magic crystals. When it came to magic crystals, Skyflare was wealthier than most superpowers operating in the modern god's domain. When the transaction was completed, Feng couldn't help his elation. After all, he now had the 8 million magic crystals required to construct the small mobile fortress. Afterward, all he needed to do was collect 2 million pieces of mana ore and 30,000 mana stones. In addition, he also had a chance to raid the Tier 4 infant dragon. Leaving the Skyflare Hotel, Feng looked at the additional 4.5 million magic crystals in his bag and smiled. Now that I have the money, it's about time to have Lifeless Thorn and the others undergo their promotion. Chapter 2778, Semi-Finished Mana Body Meteorite City, Silver Hotel. After Feng received 4.5 million magic crystals from Skyflare, he returned to the Silver Hotel with Yu Luo. As for the small auction he initially planned to hold, Lionheart had announced to the public that Skyflare would monopolize all of the products. Hence, the commotion over the auction died down quickly. None of Meteorite City's various powers dared to voice their opinions on Skyflare's monopoly. After all, Skyflare was the sole power in the city with 2 Tier 4 combatants under its command. Previously, the powers with Tier 4 combatants still dared to stand up against Skyflare because Lionheart could not easily kill other Tier 4 combatants by himself. However, now that Skyflare's Wind Chaser was a Tier 4 assassin, it would be a piece of cake for Skyflare to kill any individual Tier 4 combatant. Hence, even the other 2 of the top 3 player forces in Meteorite City decided to tolerate the situation. Not to mention, while the Crystal of Souls could indeed strengthen an individual's soul, the amount of help this improvement could provide in the Tier 4 promotion quest was minuscule. Even if Skyflare obtained all 5 Crystals of Souls, the adventurer team would, at most, increase the number of Tier 4 combatants it had from 2 to 3. Meanwhile, back in his room, Feng promptly took out 75,000 magic crystals and distributed them to Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, Cleansing Whistle, and Yu Luo. Right, each of you take a drop of soul water as well, Feng said as he took out 5 drops of soul water and distributed them. Once you are done collecting the legacy fragments, drink it immediately. Although it isn't as effective as the Crystal of Souls, it can still clear your mind. You should have an easier time learning your legacy skill. In response, Lifeless Thorn and the other Azura members nodded and accepted the soul water. Yu Luo, however, hesitated. She didn't know whether she should accept the soul water, which cost 30,000 magic crystals a drop. Guild leader Black Flame, this soul water is too valuable. I already feel very indebted to you just for letting me challenge my Tier 4 promotion quest this time. I really cannot accept this soul water, Yu Luo said, rejecting Feng's gift after giving the matter some thought. Heaven's Blade had cooperated with Zero Wing only once. The 2 organizations couldn't even be considered allies. If she accepted this soul water, she would owe Feng a huge favor. In that case, she would have a difficult time explaining herself to Zwei once she returned. However, in response to Yu Luo's rejection, Feng shook his head and said, Miss Yu Luo, you must have misunderstood me. I'm not giving you this soul water for free. I need you to help me with something in the near future. If you reach Tier 4, we'll have a higher chance of success. Help you with something? Yu Luo was a little dazed. That's right. I plan to raid that Tier 4 infant dragon. However, Tier 3 players are useless against an infant dragon. Only Tier 4 players will matter. Meanwhile, as you've reached the Void Realm already, your control over mana should be excellent. Your concentration should also be only one step away from reaching the Tier 4 standard. With the Soul Water's help, you'll have a better chance of promoting to Tier 4, Feng said, nodding. Hence, this Soul Water is my investment in you. I'm not giving it to you for free, so you don't need to overthink things. The upcoming raid of the Tier 4 infant dragon wasn't something Tier 3 players could stick their hands into. Only Tier 4 players could be of help. A Tier 4 healer would be especially useful. Since Feng couldn't guarantee that Yenya would succeed in her Tier 4 promotion quest, having a backup plan would naturally be better. Not to mention, he currently had over 2,000 drops of soul water on hand. He could still afford such a small investment. I understand. If I don't get promoted to Tier 4 this time, I will find a way to pay you back for this soul water, Yu Luo said. With Feng's words, the burden she felt lightened considerably. Truthfully, she would be lying if she said that she did not want the soul water. After all, the Tier 4 promotion quest was no walk in the park. Meteorite City's peak experts demonstrated this point quite well. Among all the peak experts who had challenged their Tier 4 promotion quest, less than 10% succeeded. Not to mention, she was slightly weaker than them. However, if she had the soul water's mind-cleansing effect, she would most likely be able to stand on equal footing with the local peak experts. Yu Luo accepted the soul water, a glint of determination appearing in her eyes. This was because this drop of soul water represented not just hope but also a burden. If she completed her Tier 4 promotion quest, then she would be able to repay all of the favors she owed right away. After all, Tier 4 great clerics were incredibly rare even in the ancient god's domain, let alone the modern god's domain. You guys can go now. Whether you can get promoted or not will all depend on yourselves now, Feng said after Yu Luo accepted the soul water. He then instructed the group of 5, remember, act according to your strengths when choosing your respective Tier 4 skills. There is no need to learn the strongest one. Instead, learn the one you're most proficient at. He did not doubt the ability of the 5 people before him to collect the necessary number of legacy fragments. His only worry was their ability to learn a Tier 4 legacy skill within the allotted time. Afterward, under Yu Luo's lead, Lifeless Thorn and the others departed for Meteorite City's Tier 4 instructors. Now, only Feng remained inside the hotel room. Let's hope a few of them can reach Tier 4. If that's the case, we'll have an easier time dealing with that infant dragon. Looking at the group of 5's departing figures, Feng inwardly celebrated the fact that he managed to get through his Tier 4 promotion quest previously. Immediately afterward, he sensed the state of his mana body and smiled. It's about time I grinded for some levels. If I don't get used to this mana body, I might cause the quest to fail. After unlocking his mana body to a 110% completion rate, he had not had an opportunity to get used to it properly. His duel with Lionheart didn't prove anything. After all, mana bodies provided all-around improvements to players. There was no way he could determine all of these improvements just by putting all his strength into one attack. In fact, he couldn't even tell if his overall combat power had improved or not through his duel with Lionheart. This was because the mana body's improvement mainly led to subtle improvements in various aspects. On the surface, it was impossible to tell if his improved mana body had brought any changes to his overall combat power. After all, his basic attributes remained the same as before. Right now, the only obvious improvements were in the density of his mana, his control over mana, his physique, and his 5 senses. During his fight with Lionheart, he had only proven that the improvement of his mana body had positive effects on his mana techniques. Even then, he still wasn't clear how the improvement had triggered such a change. Needless to say, he was even more clueless about the other benefits his improved mana body had to offer. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. If he wished to fully utilize his new mana body and maximize his combat power, he would need to read apt to his mana body. It was akin to learning a new skill or spell. He would need to put in a lot of time and effort into adapting and training. Only after he could make use of his mana body at an instinctive level could he be considered to have truly adapted to it. At this point, his mana body could only be considered a semi-finished product. Next, he would have to explore his mana body thoroughly. Feng drank a drop of soul water, recovering some of the concentration he had expended executing Holy Devour. He then put on his black cloak and silently departed from Meteorite City. After taking a look at the system map, he took to the skies and made his way toward the anti-magic volcano, a level 135 neutral map located a distance from Meteorite City. From start to end, nobody in Meteorite City was aware that he had left the city. Chapter 2779, Astonishing Improvements. According to Feng's understanding, few players and NPCs from Meteorite City and other nearby cities were willing to come to the anti-magic volcano to grind and explore. Several factors contributed to this situation. Firstly, the thin mana environment here prevented players and NPCs from exhibiting the power of their skills and spells to their fullest extent. This, in turn, would put players and NPCs at a severe disadvantage against monsters. Secondly, what little mana there was in the anti-magic volcano was incredibly chaotic, which made it nigh impossible to control. Hence, doing combat here would not allow one to improve their control over mana. Thirdly and most importantly, the monsters inhabiting the anti-magic volcano consisted solely of fire-type elemental creatures and beasts. These monsters had a combat power a lot higher than the average monsters. In addition, they existed in large numbers in the anti-magic volcano. Even a 1,000-man team of Tier 3 players would have difficulty staying alive in this map, let alone grinding for EXP. However, unlike other players, Feng considered this neutral map the perfect leveling spot for him. This place really is amazing. There are actually so many great lords and grand lords here. As Feng looked down at the wandering monsters while hovering in midair, he couldn't help a little excitement. With this, I won't have to worry about not having enough crystals of souls. Volcanic Behemoth, Demonic Beast, Grand Lord, level 139 HP 3,600,000,000, Infernal Warlord, Elemental Creature, Great Lord, level 137 HP 1,320,000,000, Infernal Chieftain, Elemental Creature, Grand Lord, HP 3,100,000,000. Feng had to admit that the anti-magic volcano was a sight to behold. This neutral map teemed with Great Lord-ranked monsters. Moreover, they moved in large groups of 100 or more closely positioned to each other. If one made too much of a commotion when fighting a group of monsters here, one would easily attract monsters from other areas. However, despite the high difficulty of this map, it was the perfect grinding spot for Tier 4 existences, specifically Tier 4 experts with a mana domain. Feng charged at the volcanic behemoth, the strongest monster in sight, without hesitation. The next moment, when Feng got within 300 yards of the volcanic behemoth, the Grand Lord in question noticed his presence. Immediately, the 30-meter-tall beast covered in flaming scales let loose a deafening roar. The roar instantly attracted the wandering and resting volcanic beasts, and over 3,000 volcanic beasts converged on the volcanic behemoth's location in the blink of an eye. The majority of these volcanic beasts were level 135 plus lords, with some of them great lords. Even a 1,000-man team composed of Tier 3 experts of the same level would falter when faced with so many volcanic beasts. After all, not only were these monsters moving in an organized manner, but the mana their bodies radiated also showed faint signs of synchronizing, which would double the power of the fire-type spells they cast. Suddenly, thousands of fiery attacks shot into the air, heading toward Feng. Although the attacks were not fully synchronized with each other, the sheer number still allowed them to exhibit power at the Tier 4 standard. That was more than enough to deter any ordinary Tier 4 combatant from tanking the attacks. Come! However, when Feng saw the several thousand attacks coming at him, not only did he not show the slightest sign of fear, but he even displayed excitement. The next moment, Feng swung his hand and began manipulating his mana body's power. Suddenly, with Feng as the center, a ripple spread into the surroundings. At the same time, a storm brewed in the surrounding space, causing even space to shudder. Boom! 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 For a time, explosions echoed throughout the sky in rapid succession. The sky itself transformed into a sea of flames as the storm annihilated the thousands of fiery attacks. Afterward, the volcanic beasts enveloped by the storm knelt on the ground one after another. Only the Great Lord-ranked volcanic beasts remained standing. However, standing was pretty much all they could do, as even moving their bodies took grueling effort. As for the volcanic behemoth, the leader of the volcanic beasts, it didn't fare that much better than the Great Lord-ranked volcanic beasts either. My mana domain has improved to such an extent? Feng was astonished when he saw the thousands of kneeling volcanic beasts and the volcanic behemoth, which had great difficulty moving his current mana domain, was actually capable of suppressing even a Grand Lord to such an extent. Despite being a strength-based demonic beast, the volcanic behemoth had barely half of its mobility left. If he used his mana domain against agility-based demonic creatures, the suppression effect would most likely be even more prominent. After a moment reveling in the improvement of his mana domain, Feng stopped being polite with the volcanic beasts. Immediately, he activated Blade Domain and began slaughtering the volcanic beasts with the 7 summoned magic swords. All his attacks dealt damage in the tens of millions, with critical hits causing over 100 million damage. In the case of the Lord-ranked volcanic beasts, which had only several hundred million HP, they fell after just 2 or 3 hits. In the end, it took Feng less than half an hour to annihilate the 3,000+ volcanic beasts. Even the volcanic behemoth failed to escape his grasp. Since Feng fought monsters of a higher level, his experience bar skyrocketed after the battle ended. Of course, as he had already reached Tier 4, monsters at the Lord rank and below granted him diminished EXP, only those at the Great Lord rank and above granted him normal amounts of EXP. This could be considered one of the disadvantages of getting promoted to Tier 4. Even so, Feng still reached 34% of level 127 after the battle. His leveling speed was simply phenomenal. At this rate, he could easily level up twice by the end of the day. However, he wasn't the slightest bit surprised by this situation. In God's domain, after one reached Tier 4, leveling up became a very simple task. All one needed to do was search for places with a lot of monsters. Hence, in the past, Tier 4 players would complain about the lack of grinding spots in God's domain. Often, the task of searching for monsters was much more troublesome for Tier 4 players than the task of killing monsters. What was even more troublesome was collecting the monsters' loot. The time it took to collect the loot of the monsters they killed was several times longer than the time it took to kill the monsters. Sure enough, the loot collection process is much more tiresome than the grinding process. Feng got a headache when he saw all the loot scattered within a 1,000-yard radius of himself. At this moment, he finally understood the suffering of those Tier 4 experts in the past. However, ignoring the loot wasn't an option either. After all, these monsters dropped considerably excellent loot. Among the items dropped were standard magic crystals, fire-attributed magic crystals, and various rare ores. The fire-attributed magic crystals were especially valuable, worth far more than the standard magic crystal. Attributed magic crystals were essential in the production of certain epic weapons and equipment. Some peak constructions also required attributed magic crystals to build. However, attributed magic crystals were incredibly rare in the modern God's domain. Hence, it would be a massive waste to simply ignore the loot. Feng ended up spending 2 whole hours gathering all of the items scattered across the battlefield. However, he had to admit that he had earned a huge harvest. Even if he ignored the numerous level 130 bronze, mysterious iron, secret silver, and fine gold weapons and equipment he got, just the magic crystals numbered over 4,000 already. He had also picked up over 300 fire-attributed magic crystals. Afterward, he killed several more groups of monsters in the anti-magic volcano, pushing his level from 127 to 128, the total number of magic crystals collected to beyond 30,000, and the number of fire-attributed magic crystals collected to 1,500. Be it his leveling speed or money-making speed, both exceeded the standard of ordinary Tier 4 players. Since the sky was darkening, Feng found a safe cave and called up his system interface. That's enough for today. With several more days grinding here, should be able to exceed the average level of the peak experts here. By then, I shouldn't be at a disadvantage in levels when the infant dragon raid takes place. When Feng saw that he had already reached 19% of level 128, he found his leveling speed very satisfactory. Not to mention, he had managed to produce 7 crystals of souls through today's grind, far more than what he could produce in the modern god's domain. Afterward, Feng logged out of the game to rest. After all, he had already spent more than 24 hours online. Even if he was using the fearless cabin now, staying online for long periods still wasn't wise. Once he went offline, before he could even climb out of his cabin, a message notification sounded in his cabin. The message's sender was none other than Liang Jing, the person managing Zero Wing's headquarters on his behalf right now. Guild leader, you finally decided to pick up. Liang Jing said in exasperation. I've already brought the 2 vice guild leaders to Yuantian City as per your request. What should we do now? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You're here already? Surprised by Liang Jing's swift action, Feng chuckled and said, okay, bring them to the upper zone's entrance now. I'll wait for you there. The upper zone's entrance? Liang Jing couldn't help growing a little excited at Feng's words. Okay. We'll be there in 3 hours. Feng burst into laughter at Liang Jing's excited expression. However, he understood her mood. After all, the upper zone was a place countless people yearned to enter. But this is a problem. I only managed to get 100 points yesterday, even after exchanging all of the credits I had. If the 2 of them join me, I can't even afford food for the 3 of us. It seems I'll have to convert those 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal now. The thought of the food prices here gave Feng a headache. Fortunately, he had earned a killing from mythology. Otherwise, he would have to start begging for food. Feng tidied himself up and hurried to the Green God Tower. Chapter 2780, Minor Character. Upper Zone, Base Layer. Feng enjoyed the scenery of the base layer as he strolled around the residential area he lived in. Contrary to his expectations, he did not see any of the paradisiacal sceneries depicted in the rumors spread in the outside world. Instead, what he saw were only high-rise buildings. The areas not occupied by high-rise buildings held facilities such as restaurants, training halls, and gyms. Moreover, compared to the outside world, almost all of the people gave the impression that they were incredibly busy, and they all had tense expressions on their faces. This could be considered natural. After all, the upper zone wasn't some kind of paradise. Instead, it was a place with far more intense competition than the outside world. From what Feng understood, Yuantian City's upper zone had a population of less than 300,000, nearly a quarter of which were employees of the Green God Company. As for the remaining inhabitants, the majority of them belonged to the various major corporations, and only a small portion were people who had entered the upper zone through special selections or reserved slots. Meanwhile, unlike what the general public thought, one wouldn't live a carefree life after entering the upper zone. On the contrary, one would face even greater pressure than when they lived in the outside world. The reason for this was the upper zone's ridiculously high cost of living. Just the matter of food already gave Feng a headache. Even the most basic meal cost 30 points, equivalent to 300,000 credits. Nobody would pay such an absurd price for food in the outside world. Yet, in the upper zone, this amount of money would buy only the most basic meal. This was still only a small problem in the upper zone. The truly troublesome aspect was the various training resources available here. Just living in the upper zone wouldn't be enough for a person to achieve longevity. One still needed to include various exercises and medicines into the equation, all of which cost a lot of points. Without sufficient wealth and resources, one couldn't live in the upper zone at all. Those born in the upper zone were allowed to live freely until the age of 12. Afterward, they had to undergo a series of tests until they reached 15. If they failed the tests, they would be banished from the upper zone. Moreover, passing the Green God Company's basic assessment would only qualify one to work at the lowest level of the Green God Company. Only if one conquered the mental path before the age of 20 or made a great contribution to the Green God Company would one gain authority and be considered an ordinary person in the upper zone. If one wished to live longer and better in the upper zone, and perhaps even gain influence and become someone respected by the major corporations, one would have to head to the middle layer. Otherwise, one would only be an ant living in the base layer. After all, the base layer's average lifespan might be 150 years. But that didn't mean every individual would live up to 150 years old. Moreover, there was also the matter of retaining one's youth and physical vitality. For residents living in the base layer, even if they could live a fulfilling life and constantly supplement themselves with the various resources available in the base layer, they could retain their youth until the age of 50, at most. Afterward, their physical fitness would decline. By the time they reached 100 years old, they would have entered old age. However, in the case of people living in the middle layer, they would still retain their youthful vitality even at the age of 80. Appearance-wise, they would look like they were just entering their 30s. In other words, the middle layer's residents got to retain their youth for nearly twice as long as the base layer's residents. And even at the age of 120, they would only be middle-aged and look like they were just entering their 40s. Who wouldn't go crazy at such a temptation? After strolling about for a while, Feng rode one of the upper zone's free levitating smart cars and arrived at the Green God Tower roughly 20 minutes later. At the end of the journey, he had to admit that the upper zone was truly amazing. The various transportation facilities here were completely free, and the cars were even equipped with fully intelligent navigation systems. He could travel anywhere he wished with just a word. Feng made his way to the Green God Tower's 7th floor, which was where all resource exchanges took place in the base layer. Everyone seeking to convert credits into trade points, exchange rare resources for trade points and contribution points, or exchange points for the various medicines the Green God Company offered would come here. Upon arriving on the 7th floor, he found that the hall, which was the size of 8 basketball courts, was crowded with thousands of people. Compared to the registration room he visited previously, this place was many times livelier. Most of the gathered people were wealthy children seeking to exchange for trade points using credits. As to why they were doing so, the reason was simple. Most, if not all, of the major corporations operating in the upper zone had existed for over a century already. After operating for such a long time, the shareholder families running these corporations had grown significantly in size. At this point, with how large the shareholder family's population had become, these families would be fortunate to put their children into the upper zone. In addition, the resources the Green God Company sought were all incredibly rare and valuable. For the sake of their own future in the upper zone, the various corporations wouldn't let the children of their shareholder families casually exchange resources for points at all. Hence, aside from the designated heir or heiress of their respective families, the other children who had entered the upper zone would have to rely on themselves to secure resources in the upper zone. However, as most of these children were not particularly talented, they naturally didn't have the means to get the necessary resources or achievements to earn themselves a lot of trade points and contribution points. They could only visit the exchange center every day to exchange for trade points using credits. As a result, despite the Green God Tower's exchange center being open 24/7, there would almost always be people lining up before the credit area's exchange counters. If news of such a scene were to reach the outside world, jaws would definitely drop. After all, every one of the wealthy children lining up in the exchange center was a prince or princess of a major corporation. Normally, they would have numerous people at their beck and call. Yet, in the exchange center, they had no choice but to behave like normal people and stand in line themselves. And even more surprisingly, none of these wealthy children in the queue was making a fuss. Unlike the credit area, there was only one exchange counter in the contribution area. Usually, almost nobody stood before this exchange counter, and anybody wishing to use its services could do so without having to wait. However, when Feng approached the contribution area, two people were already standing before the exchange counter there. Moreover, he actually recognized both of them. One of them was none other than Feng, the heir of the Five States Corporation. Out of all the corporation heirs Feng had met before, Feng had the most exaggerated physical fitness. Feng also did not behave like the typical princeling of a major corporation. The person standing behind Feng was the butler Zhuolinxiu. Young master, now that we've completed the Green God Company's assignment, I believe your total contribution points will reach 60,000 once the evaluation is complete and enter the top 10 rankings. If we factor in the corporation's decision to support you fully this time, I'm certain you'll be able to enter the top 3 in the contribution competition this time, Zhuolinxiu said excitedly. The contribution competition was held once every 3 months. The top 3 of the competition would gain the right to stay in the middle layer. Although the duration of the stay was only 3 short months, this was also one of the few ways the various corporations could gain access to the middle layer. Meanwhile, so long as Feng entered the middle layer, he could acquire resources that were far superior to what was available in the base layer. At that time, his status in the upper zone would immediately skyrocket. However, Feng remained indifferent to Zhuolinxiu's words. Shaking his head, he said, "While I am confident of getting into the top 5, my chances of getting into the top 3 are still slim. The people currently ranked among the top 3 have held those positions for the past 2 years. According to rumors, those 3 people are close to gaining high-grade authority. They will definitely do everything they can to retain their positions, so it won't be easy to surpass them in contributions. In fact, despite not having put in any real effort, they have already accumulated over 100,000 contribution points. If we show signs of trying to compete for the top 3, it wouldn't be strange if their points suddenly doubled or tripled." At Feng's words, Zhuolinxiu fell silent, acknowledging that the top 3 rankers were indeed a cut above everyone else. After all, those 3 people had already monopolized the top 3 positions of the contribution competition for the past 2 years. Trying to surpass them in contributions definitely wouldn't be an easy task. While Feng and Zhuolinxiu were conversing, the staff member manning the exchange counter finished calculating Feng's contribution. "Sir, after including the assignment you completed this time, you now have 62,425 contribution points accumulated. You are currently ranked 7th in the contribution competition." 7th? Feng did not feel particularly happy to hear that he was ranked 7th in the competition, taking the result in stride. After giving the staff member a nod, he promptly turned around to leave. The instant Feng and Zhuolinxiu turned around, they noticed Feng making his way to the counter. "Why is he here?" Zhuolinxiu rubbed his eyes in doubt when he saw Feng, who was dressed in white casuals. The upper zone was a place that countless people sought to enter but couldn't. The guild leaders of many superpowers didn't have the qualifications to enter the upper zone even now. Yet, Feng, who was merely the guild leader of a pseudo-superpower, had actually entered it. This was simply incredible. At this time, let alone Zhuolinxiu, even Feng revealed a rare look of surprise on his face. When Feng last met Feng, in Fenglin City's Redstone restaurant, the latter was merely an insignificant minor character in his eyes. After all, Feng and his subordinates simply weren't capable of reaching the playing field Feng fought on. At best, he could only use Zero Wing as a pawn to hinder his opponents. Even when Zero Wing developed rapidly and became enemies with many superpowers, he still thought nothing of the guild. After all, what the various major corporations were truly competing for wasn't God's domain, but the upper zone's resources. Yet, now, a minor character like Feng had actually set foot into the upper zone. This situation was as unbelievable as a fairy tale. Did the Boulder Corporation give him a reserved slot? Feng muttered in speculation. That should be the case. Otherwise, there's no way someone like him, with no background, can enter the upper zone, Zhuolinxiu said, nodding in agreement. In the recent struggle for the reserve seats of God's domain's 12 great guilds, Frost Heaven had surpassed everyone's expectations and secured itself a seat, instantly becoming a true titan in God's domain. The biggest contributor to Frost Heaven's victory was undoubtedly Zero Wing. Hence, it wouldn't be strange for Frost Heaven to grant Zero Wing a few of the upper zone's reserved slots in gratitude. After thinking up to this point, Feng and Zhuolinxiu calmed down. Meanwhile, as Feng walked over, he merely glanced at Feng and Zhuolinxiu before continuing on his way. He did not take the initiative to say hello. After all, he wasn't exactly familiar with the two. He was also in a hurry right now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Zhuolinxiu's expression turned ugly at Feng's response. He never imagined that Feng would actually show so little respect to Feng. The man didn't even bother saying hello and merely walked away like a stranger. Feng simply didn't place the Five States Corporation in his eyes. However, before Zhuolinxiu could vent his anger, he was stunned to see Feng stop before the contribution area's exchange counter. What is he trying to do? Feng was confused when he saw Feng conversing with the staff member at the counter. That's the exchange counter for the contribution area. Did he come here to exchange for trade points because there was no line here? Sure enough, he is a minor character. He only knows how to head to places where he can gain advantages. He thinks he can save time by coming here, yet he is wholly ignorant of the rules, Zhuolinxiu sneered as he looked at Feng, who was still conversing with the staff, in contempt. However, no sooner had Zhuolinxiu finished speaking than the nearby staff member suddenly exclaimed in a loud and excited tone, "Congratulations, Mr. Shi. You have gained a total of 50,000 contribution points and 5 million trade points this time. You are currently ranked 10th in the contribution competition." Chapter 2781, Times have changed 50,000 contribution points. 10th place. When Zhuolinxiu heard the Green God Company's staff's words, he was dumbfounded. In fact, even Feng, who possessed an apathetic personality, felt a little dazed at the staff member's words. After all, Feng was initially only a pawn in their eyes. Yet, not only did he climb up to the same playing field they fought on, but he was now even actively competing with them. No wonder he didn't put us in his eyes. Realization dawned upon Zhuolinxiu as he looked at Feng. However, a moment later, a hint of mockery appeared on his face as he said, "It's a pity he doesn't know that the contribution competition participants are just warming up and that the current rankings are only temporary." The upper zone's contribution competition had been going on for many years now, and everyone mostly understood how it worked. Those intent on participating in a particular season's competition generally wouldn't reveal their cards in the first 2 months of the season. This was because contribution points were basically trump cards for participants. Naturally, it would be best if participants hid their cards as deeply as possible and only revealed them at the last possible moment. Only then could these trump cards play a vital role. Moreover, there was an added benefit to accumulating contribution points in secret, deciding whether one would continue participating in a particular season's contribution competition or not. After all, aside from time-based assignments, other forms of contributions could be reserved for future competitions if necessary. Since the contribution competition had been running for many years now, some participants had been accumulating contribution points for a long time. These participants were waiting for the fateful day when they would reveal all their cards, instantly securing one of the top 3 positions, and gain access to the middle layer. Meanwhile, the current contribution competition was less than a month along. Hence, the various participants were still testing the waters and had yet to seriously invest their contribution points. The majority of their current points were from completing time-based assignments the Green God Company issued, not from long-term assignments that could be turned in at any time. Although I don't know why he made such a move, this is a good opportunity for us, Feng said, shaking his head as he regained his calm. Old Zhua, go talk to him and tell him I'll buy the remaining points he has kept hidden at double the price. Double the price? Zhuolinxiu looked at Feng in surprise. Young master, historically, purchasing points at 1.5 times their original value is already pretty high. After all, there is no way these people can secure one of the top 3 rankings. There's no meaning for them to hold on to their points. If other people were to find out that you're offering to purchase his hidden points at double the price, they'd most likely raise their own prices, as well. There were many instances where multiple participants joined hands to compete in the contribution competition. After all, unlike contribution points gained through completing assignments, points gained through other sources could be freely traded in secret. When a competition was about to end, participants who were close to the top 3 positions would often purchase the hidden points of other participants. Naturally, as Feng was aiming for one of the top 3 positions this time, he would also participate in this practice. The exchange rate would be based on the prices of the items sold by the Green God Company. Just do as I say. The Green God Company announced that the top 20 participants would receive a reward. So many people are trying to compete for the top 20 positions. It is only natural for the price of contribution points this time to be higher, Feng said, shaking his head. According to the information he had obtained, the Green God Company intended to further squeeze the various corporations for their wealth. To do so, the company had intensified the competition by allowing the top 20 participants to exchange for a limited number of items exclusive to the middle layer. Once this information spread, the price of contribution points would definitely increase. However, while a price hike was inevitable, the increase wouldn't be exaggerated either. After all, there were only so many items the top 20 participants could exchange using contribution points. Beyond that purchase limit, whatever contribution points they had remaining would become useless. I understand. Zhuo Linqiu nodded and walked toward Feng. On the other side, Feng was currently ecstatic. Just a second ago, he had still been a poor bastard in the upper zone. Now, however, he had 5 million trade points to his name, enough to purchase 5 ordinary housing units in the base layer. Of course, these points were still insufficient to purchase a large villa in the base layer. However, they were definitely more than adequate for his daily expenditure. At the very least, even after welcoming Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose into the upper zone, he wouldn't have to worry about their necessities. However, it's going to be difficult to get another large influx of points. It seems I'll have to think of a long-term way to secure 7 luminaries crystals in bulk, Feng thought with a sigh. 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal was a significant amount, yet it was only enough to get him 5 million trade points and 50,000 contribution points. With just this many trade points and contribution points, let alone catching up with the top 3 rankers of the competition, he probably couldn't afford anything from the middle layer. However, for his present self, obtaining more 7 luminaries crystals wasn't much of a challenge. After all, he was currently in the ancient god's domain. The resources available in the ancient era were far more abundant than in the modern era. After verifying on his quantum watch that he had received the 5 million trade points and 50,000 contribution points, Feng planned to head for the upper zone's entrance to receive Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. After all, this was the first time they were visiting the upper zone. Without anyone to guide them, it was very easy for problems to occur. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. There were many taboos in the upper zone. If they accidentally violated one of these taboos, there was a high chance they would be banished from the upper zone permanently. However, before Feng could leave the exchange counter, Zhuo Linqiu appeared beside him. Guild leader Shi, we meet again. Although Zhuo Linqiu felt displeased at Feng's earlier attitude, as Feng's butler, he still greeted Feng politely. Master Zhuo, do you have business with me? Feng asked calmly as he looked at Zhuo Linqiu. Inwardly, though, Feng was a little surprised by this situation. Although he had expected Feng to seek him out sooner or later, he never thought that the man would act so quickly. Kurue had informed him about the ins and outs of the contribution competition, so he knew that those competing for the top 3 spots would secretly purchase contribution points from other participants. Now that he had just exchanged for 50,000 contribution points in one fell swoop, those seeking the top 3 spots couldn't ignore his existence. Indeed, I do. Moreover, this is great news for you, guild leader Shi, Zhuo Linqiu said with a faint smile. I believe you know about the matters regarding the contribution competition already, so I'll get straight to the point. Young Master Han wishes to purchase the contribution points you have yet to turn in. Moreover, young Master Han is willing to purchase them at double their market value. May I know what you think of this, guild leader Shi? Chapter 2782, Wealthy Shi Feng, double the market value? Shi Feng was a little surprised when he heard Zhuo Linxiu's words. According to Kurue, the transaction price for contribution points would reach 1.5 times the market value at most. Moreover, that was when the contribution competition was incredibly intense. After all, unless one entered the middle layer, it didn't matter how many contribution points one managed to accumulate. Yet, Feng was offering double the market value. Even if the Green God Company would allow the top 20 participants to exchange for 3 items from the middle layer this time, this was still a very high price. After all, the difficulty of getting into the top 3 was simply too great. Before Shi Feng looked into the current top 3 participants, he had still been confident of getting into the top 3. However, after gaining an understanding of those 3 participants, all thoughts of entering the top 3 had disappeared from his mind. This was because those 3 people could instantly gain an additional 1 million contribution points if they grew serious. In other words, if he wished to secure one of the top 3 positions, he would need 100,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal at the very minimum. What did this amount represent? Even if he squeezed the 5 great super guilds and a dozen other superpowers dry, getting such a huge number of 7 luminaries crystals was impossible. Moreover, this was only the minimum requirement to compete for the top 3 positions. Hence, he had no choice but to wait for Zero Wing to grow stronger and set aside trying for one of the top 3 spots for the future. In the current competition, he simply had no chance whatsoever. Even if he was currently in the ancient god's domain, with its more abundant resources, the 7 luminaries crystal was still an incomparably valuable commodity. Moreover, its rarity was not the slightest bit lower than in the modern era. In fact, competition for the 7 luminaries crystal was intenser in the ancient era. From what he heard, the interstellar continent's various powers were similarly purchasing 7 luminaries crystals at astronomical prices. Residents of the interstellar continent could exchange for living resources in the real world using 7 luminaries crystals. In fact, if one collected a sufficient number of 7 luminaries crystals, one could even get promoted from an ordinary civilian to a resident of the core area. Simply put, every player in the ancient era was competing for 7 luminaries crystals. On the other hand, only the major corporations based in upper zones were competing for 7 luminaries crystals in the modern god's domain. The competition over the crystals had nothing to do with ordinary players. In fact, it didn't even have anything to do with ordinary corporations. Hence, even if he were to contest frantically for 7 luminaries crystals in the ancient era, the amount he could get his hands on was unlikely to secure him one of the top 3 spots in the current contribution competition. Now, he would be satisfied so long as he could secure one of the top 20 positions, and he could indeed afford to sell a portion of his additional points. That's right. Double the market value. Guild leader Shi, you should be able to see young Master Han's sincerity in this matter, Zhuo Linxiu said, chuckling. I can assure you that you won't find another person in the base layer who would offer you such a price. The Five States Corporation was one of the top corporations in the country. It had deeper foundations than even the Boulder Corporation, albeit by only a slight margin. In addition, the corporation even had a genius like Feng as its heir. It was only a matter of time before the corporation set foot in the middle layer. After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng replied, I can agree to that price, but I have a condition. Feng's offer would tempt anyone. After all, this was equivalent to receiving a 50% discount on the various products the Green God Company put up for exchange. For Shi Feng, who was currently severely lacking in the upper zone's resources, Feng's offer was heaven sent. Condition? What condition? Zhuo Linxiu frowned slightly. In his opinion, the price Feng offered was already quite generous. He never thought that Shi Feng would want a foot after getting an inch. I want to settle the transaction using life potions, phantom potions, or the middle layer's limited products, Feng said. I will not accept anything else, apart from these items. 5 million trade points were already more than enough for him to get by in the base layer. There was no point in getting more. Only the limited exchange items were of value to him. Particularly, the life potion and the phantom potion weren't available in the outside world. Even if he tried to exchange for these items using his authority, he could get only 5 bottles per year. This amount wasn't even enough for his own use, much less sharing it with other people. This condition is too much. You should know that those items can't be bought even with a large number of trade points and contribution points. Zhuo Linxiu flatly refused Feng's condition. Nobody in the entire base layer would satisfy this condition of yours. Whether it was the life potion, the phantom potion, or the middle layer's limited items, they were all incredibly precious to the various corporations. No one would casually trade them away. How about I buy them at their original price? Feng suggested. Feng understood that he was indeed asking for a lot with his condition. However, this was also how negotiations worked. Only after both sides agreed on a price could a transaction take place. Zhuo Linxiu fell speechless at Feng's response. He felt that Feng didn't understand his previous words at all. However, before Zhuo Linxiu could manage a response, Feng's holographic projection suddenly appeared from Zhuo Linxiu's quantum watch. It is impossible for me to sell those items at base price. However, with my authority, I can sell some to you at double the price. This is also the lowest I can go, Feng said. Moreover, I believe that nobody else in the base layer would offer you a better price. That works. Feng didn't feel particularly surprised at Feng's counter-offer. On the contrary, he found this outcome to be quite excellent already. The limited items the Green God Company offered for exchange came with fixed price tags, and residents with the necessary authority could exchange for these items at any time. However, as their description suggested, each resident could exchange for only a limited number of these items. If a person wanted to get their hands on more, they could purchase these items from other residents at a marked-up price. Moreover, even if one were willing to pay the extra cost, one wouldn't necessarily be able to find a willing seller. That settles it, then. Feng nodded. However, let me get one thing straight first. Every transaction we conduct must be valued at 50,000 contribution points or more. Otherwise, our transaction will be invalid. That won't be a problem, Feng assured, smiling. He understood what was going through Feng's mind. A sum of several thousand contribution points was most likely nothing in Feng's eyes. Moreover, such an amount wouldn't be of any help to him in the contribution competition. After all, if the top 3 participants were serious, they could easily add 1,000,000 points to their names. Hence, a transaction of 50,000 contribution points was most likely the lowest acceptable amount for Feng. Okay. So long as you've collected 50,000 contribution points, you can come and find me at any time, Feng said before disconnecting the quantum communication. After Feng finished speaking, Zhuo Linxiu turned around and walked away, leaving Feng alone at the exchange counter. When Zhuo Linxiu returned to Feng's side, he had a hesitant expression. Just speak your mind, Feng said as he looked at his old butler. Young master, I'm afraid the old master and the others will have big opinions about your decision to sell him those items at just double the price, Zhuo Linxiu said worriedly. After all, those items are things the corporation went to great lengths to accumulate. They are meant to serve as the foundation for the family's younger generations. Foundation? Feng suddenly smiled. Unless we enter the middle layer, the 5 states corporation will be nothing but ants in the eyes of those above. Also, we have failed to enter the middle layer after all these years. If we don't fight now, when will we fight? Moreover, the family has already promised to assist me with everything they have. If they're not even willing to part with these items, how are we supposed to compete with the other participants? However, just Feng's 50,000 contribution points won't change anything, Zhuo Linxiu said. I naturally know this. Feng is only one of the small sources for me to secure contribution points. At this point, Feng's eyes began glowing slightly. The old man has already met with the other corporations in the upper zone and made some promises to them. I believe he should have no problem securing 700,000 or 800,000 contribution points for me. Afterward, it'll depend on whether I can complete the Green God Company's bounty. So long as I succeed, I am certain I can enter the top 3. He was hellbent on winning the contribution competition this time. Meanwhile, after Feng and Zhuolinxiu left the exchange center, Feng made his way to the item exchange counter. Compared to the contribution points counter, the item exchange counter had many more people lined up before it. After waiting in line for around 15 minutes, Feng exchanged for 5 phantom potions and 5 life potions, as well as 5 strengthening potions, which cost the same as the phantom potions and life potions. In the end, he spent a total of 75,000 trade points. In the outside world, that was already equivalent to 750 million credits. The strengthening potion was considered the least promising product in the upper zone because it had only one function, the strengthening of the user's physical fitness. However, residents in the upper zone would have their physical fitness automatically raised to a certain level, even without any training. If one combined this effect with daily exercise, they could elevate their physical fitness to astonishing levels. Hence, there was simply no need to spend 5,000 trade points to exchange for a strengthening potion. Nevertheless, Feng naturally believed it was better for him to raise his physical fitness as quickly as possible. After all, the stronger his physical fitness became, the easier it would be to improve his brain activity. Often, when Feng gained enlightenment and achieved a qualitative improvement in his techniques, he would find himself facing various problems stemming from his inadequate physical fitness. Had he been as fit as Feng during those times, he wouldn't have faced any problems at all. Hence, he felt that it wasn't a loss to spend 25,000 trade points for 5 strengthening potions. Not to mention, he could already be considered a wealthy person in the base layer. It's almost time to pick up Qingxue and Aqua. After taking a look at the time, Feng promptly departed the Green God Tower and hurried over to the upper zone's entrance. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. 2 hours later, a levitating car stopped at a designated parking lot before the gigantic metal door serving as the upper zone's entrance. 4 people, 1 man and 3 women then alighted from the car. They were none other than Lei Bao, Liang Jing, Bai Qingxue, and Aqua Rose. As to why Lei Bao had come along, it was as a precaution. After all, many powers were currently targeting Zero Wing. Meanwhile, Liang Jing, someone with little combat power, was unsuited for going out alone. Hence, Lei Bao would usually accompany her whenever she left Zero Wing's headquarters. Ordinary bodyguards would have little to no use against the opponents Zero Wing faced. So, this is the upper zone? Liang Jing was surprised when she saw the vast steel wall at the upper zone's entry. Even Lei Bao was surprised by the sight. He never thought that the rumored upper zone would have such an appearance. Chapter 2783, Era of Hegemony Upper Zone, Entrance. While Liang Jing and Lei Bao were shocked by the sight before them, Feng, who had been waiting quietly by the entrance for some time, approached them. How is it? It's different from what you imagined, right? Feng asked, smiling faintly as he looked at the two. Their expressions and thoughts were exactly the same as his when he first arrived before the upper zone. Guild leader, how is the upper zone? Liang Jing asked as she looked at Feng. Is it as amazing as the rumors make it out to be? There were many rumors circulating in the outside world about the upper zones. Nobody was allowed to go near the upper zones without permission despite them being in the middle of bustling cities. Hence, while everyone knew of the upper zone's existence, no outsider truly understood them. In fact, there was not the smallest piece of official news on the upper zone in the world. The information everyone knew came only from rumors. Lei Bao couldn't help pricking up his ears at Liang Jing's question. To him, the upper zone was a place he never even dared to dream of visiting. After all, even world champions in fighting couldn't visit it. It's amazing. Feng replied with a smile. It's even more amazing than the rumors make it out to be. The people inside can constantly grow stronger physically without doing any training. So, is it true that even world champion level fighters are not a big deal in the upper zone? Lei Bao asked when he heard Feng's words. The fact that a place could automatically improve a person's physical fitness was simply unbelievable. This revelation thoroughly shattered his view of physical training. That rumor is slightly exaggerated, but it's not far off from the truth either, Feng replied, not trying to conceal the truth. Even without physical training, the upper zone's residents can still achieve a physical fitness rivaling Henglian masters. With some systematic training, their physical fitness becomes even more astonishing. It's actually such an amazing place. Lei Bao was shocked. He had undergone plenty of intense training to achieve his current physical fitness, yet the upper zone's residents could easily accomplish a similar feat without any training. Who would possibly believe this? However, Lei Bao knew that Feng wouldn't lie to him, so this inflicted an even greater shock. All of a sudden, Lei Bao felt as if he had lived his life for nothing. He felt as if all his previous efforts were nothing but a joke. Master Lei Bao, no need to be discouraged. Looking at Lei Bao, who suddenly grew disheartened, Feng said, Zero Wing will also develop in the upper zone in the future. At that time, it won't be just Qingxue, Aqua, and myself who can enter this place. I will let many more people join us. Just like those international corporations, we will treat the upper zone as our headquarters. Although Feng did not speak loudly, both Lei Bao and Liang Jing gasped involuntarily at his words. At the same time, a hint of anticipation and excitement flashed in their eyes. If anyone else had made this statement, they would have most likely treated it as a joke. However, Feng was someone who constantly worked miracles, having single-handedly developed Zero Wing to its current scale. Moreover, he never did anything he was not confident of succeeding in. His declaration meant that he had some way to achieve this goal. Zero Wing will also develop in the upper zone in the future? Liang Jing couldn't help growing excited when she looked at the distant steel wall. If Zero Wing really accomplished this feat, it would truly become a powerful existence. At that time, even ordinary superpowers would be a joke to the guild. Lei Bao clenched his fists in excitement and anticipation. He felt that his decision to join Zero Wing was the wisest choice he had made in his life. These 3 bottles here are strengthening potions. Liang Jing, take 2 back and give them to Fire and Violet, Feng said as he took out 3 strengthening potions and handed 2 to Liang Jing. He then turned to Lei Bao and said, Master Lei Bao, you take 1, as well. I believe that you should be able to go a step further with this strengthening potion. Fire Dance and Violet Cloud normally trained their physical bodies very seriously. The 2 of them also possessed incredible talent in this regard. Unfortunately, due to insufficient resources, their improvements had been gradual. With the strengthening potion's assistance, their development would no longer be hindered. As for Lei Bao, he also possessed excellent talent. Unfortunately, as he had always been a lone wolf, he never managed to get his hands on any resources and could only rely on hard work. However, he had reached the point where he couldn't improve further through hard work alone. Although Feng had previously given Lei Bao several bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids, which allowed him to improve his physical fitness significantly, it was evident that S-rank nutrient fluids alone couldn't fully bring out Lei Bao's potential. However, with the strengthening potion, Lei Bao might be able to go a step further and become a half-step Henglian Grandmaster. Meanwhile, if Lei Bao succeeded, then Zero Wing would gain an additional layer of protection. Thank you, guild leader. I won't disappoint you. Lei Bao's eyes shone with gratitude as he looked at Feng. He had heard of the strengthening potion before. This thing was basically treated as a divine item in the fighting industry. Just 1 bottle could allow a person's physical fitness to undergo a qualitative transformation. Unfortunately, the medicine was incredibly rare, much rarer than even the life potion. According to rumors, even Grandmaster martial artists had difficulty getting their hands on a bottle. In fact, some grandmasters would even put their lives on the line just to get their hands on it. Yet Feng not only took out 3 bottles but even gave him one. How could Lei Bao not grow excited in this situation? With this strengthening potion, he was confident that even if he couldn't become a Henglian grandmaster, he could, at least, reach a level where he could contend with neutralizing grandmasters. By the way, guild leader, more and more NPCs are appearing in God's domain. As a result, some superpowers have designs on the Secret Covenant Tower. In fact, they've already clashed with us over a dozen times outside Sky Spring City. Currently, both sides have lost over 1,000 Tier 3 players, Liang Jing said suddenly. Fortunately, Vice Guild Leader Illusory Words and Vice Guild Leader Unyielding Heart returned in time to preside over the situation. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. However, the two of them believe that if this situation continues, their 2 guilds are unlikely to hold back the various superpowers for very long. Moreover, some small guilds have already begun disbanding due to the NPC population pressure. Many new NPC forces have also emerged in the various NPC cities, and these NPC forces are constantly harassing the local guilds and pose a headache even for the various superpowers. Hence, the various superpowers are all trying to enter the Secret Covenant Tower, which doesn't have NPC intervention. Moreover, I'm afraid that they will only grow more desperate as the NPC forces scale up their harassment. Feng frowned upon hearing Liang Jing's report on God's domains and the Secret Covenant Tower's present situation. He hadn't anticipated that the NPC forces would actually begin taking action so soon. Moreover, with the NPC forces now taking action, the main continent of God's domain would enter an era where hundreds of countries fought for hegemony. To survive the upcoming chaos, the various superpowers would probably do everything they could to secure the sacred leveling ground known as the Secret Covenant Tower. I understand. After giving the matter some thought, Feng looked at Liang Jing and instructed, for now, have everyone in the guild avoid going out to do quests if possible. Instead, have them focus on grinding in the Secret Covenant Tower and restrict their sphere of activity to Sky Spring City and our 3 guild cities. Also, have Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul hasten their exploration. It doesn't matter even if it increases the chances of the secret getting out. Our side will do the same as well. Originally, he thought that it would take the NPC forces another 2 weeks to take action. However, contrary to his expectations, the NPC forces had evidently completed their investigations already and made a move. Once begun, the NPC forces' harassment would only escalate as time passed. It wouldn't be long before members of player forces would get attacked if they left the confines of towns and cities. Given enough time, NPC forces would even start launching attacks on guild towns and cities, forcing the various guilds to abandon their guild towns and cities. This, in turn, would cripple the guild's income and force them to disband. Okay. I'll contact them once I return. Liang Jing nodded. Feng gave Liang Jing a few more instructions, such as secretly collecting the basic materials needed to construct the small mobile fortress, then brought Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose into the upper zone. As for Liang Jing and Lei Bao, after looking at the 3 of them enviously for a moment, they promptly left in the levitating car. In the upper zone, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's condition immediately saw slight improvements. Now, they no longer looked as cold and indifferent as before. The degree of mental deterioration they suffered also declined significantly. After they consumed the luxury set meals, which Feng bought for 300 trade points each, their mental states even showed signs of stabilizing. They also no longer appeared indifferent to everything around them. At the very least, they display some interest in the upper zone's matters. Occasionally, they even took the initiative to say a few words. Seeing the two's condition stabilizing, Feng breathed out a sigh of relief. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The environment here should sustain the 2 of them for a long time. The next step is to figure out a way to consolidate my standing within the top 20. After seeing Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose enter their respective fearless cabins, Feng started planning how to earn 7 Luminaries crystals in God's domain. Although he was currently ranked 10th in the contribution competition, the other participants had yet to take things seriously. Meanwhile, the competition's top 20 participants being able to exchange for 3 items from the middle layer presented a huge opportunity for the various corporations. They would definitely do everything they could to enter the top 20. If he wished to secure his position within the top 20, he would need 200,000 contribution points, at the very least, and possibly more if the competition was intense. After all, the various corporations had been operating in the upper zone for a long time now. The wealth they had accumulated wasn't something he could hope to rival. In other words, he was still short of 15,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals right now. This was an astronomical number, even for the 5 great super guilds. Afterward, Feng drank a strengthening potion and life potion before lying down in the fearless cabin in his bedroom. Log in. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.